Hey everyone, welcome back. If possible, you can support me via PayPal or become a channel member to help me keep this channel running. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story of Sword of Coming audio series. Chapter 1001, Distant Drifting Mind. After leaving the Pai Fu shop, Chen Pingan paid a visit to the young employee, who had helped him carve the 48 luminous jade cliff pebbles. The latter was extremely grateful to him, even shedding tears at one point, but Chen Pingan didn't say much. He merely chatted with the young man briefly before making his way to the old locust tree, standing at the foot of the tree for a long while. From there, he got on the talismanic boat gifted to him by Huan Yun and visited the Nightglow Grass Hall, then the old woman who was the mistress of Song Lanqiao. On both occasions he presented tea leaves from the Rainbow Sparrow residence as gifts to his hosts. The old woman was particularly pleased. At the moment, Song Lanqiao's status in the Spring Dew Garden was steadily rising, and it was all thanks to this young sword immortal. Furthermore, the young man had treated her with a great deal of respect on both of his visits. The first time she hadn't reciprocated his gifts with any of her own, and the same applied on this visit as well, not because she was stingy, but because Chen Pingan told her that good things came in threes, so he insisted that she only reciprocated him on his third visit, much to her amusement. Upon his departure, she personally escorted him to the foot of the mountain, and after he was gone, she decided that she was going to take active measures to strengthen her relationship with the Nightglow Grass Hall. On top of that, she was also going to instruct Song Lanqiao to look after the Pai Fu shop's business going forward, and there was no need for him to be discreet and secretive about it. He would have her full backing in this matter, and if anyone dared to spread gossip about it, then they would have to face the wrath of both mistress and disciple. Chen Pingan should have given a jar of tea leaves to Qi Jinglong back at the Great Emblem Sword Sect to fulfill his promise to Sun Qing, but he didn't feel it was appropriate to do so at the time. Qi Jinglong had just been forced to drink a bunch of wine during Su Xingzhou's visit, and Chen Pingan couldn't bear to force tea upon him so soon after the wine debacle. Hence, he decided to send the tea leaves to Qi Jinglong from the Spring Dew Garden. That way, he would have no choice but to accept it. During his earlier visit to the Nightglow Grass Hall, Immortal Tang's daughter, Tang Qingqing, had been absent, having gone to the Iron Worship residence to meet with her lover. According to Immortal Tang, the two of them were about to become wedded Dao partners, at which point a marriage alliance would be forged between the Nightglow Grass Hall and the Iron Worship residence. Immortal Tang invited Chen Pingan to attend the wedding, but the latter made up an excuse to turn down the invitation, and the former didn't insist. Chen Pingan didn't have any fondness for the Iron Worship residence. As a matter of fact, there was really only bad blood between them, given that he had personally killed that Vajrabhati tier guest elder of the Iron Worship residence back on the Immortal ship. However, not only had the Wei clan of the Iron Worship residence not held him responsible, they had treated him with nothing but respect. Of course, Chen Pingan wasn't so naive as to think that this forced amicable facade truly meant that he was on good terms with the Iron Worship residents. Given the way things were, it was best for both sides to leave each other alone. In the past, Chen Pingan had drunk wine with Lu Zhimao on several occasions, and they had even briefly become temporary allies. In the vast majority of cases, worldly affairs were never all that clear-cut, and it was often the case that there were no definitive enemies or allies. It was simply something that Chen Pingan had to accept whether he liked it or not. During his conversation with He Xiaoyang back when they had reunited on the west coast of the northern complete reed continent, he had told her that if the mountain-moving ape of Sun Scorch Mountain had demanded that he kowtow in order to spare Lu Xianying of his terrible fate, then he would have gladly complied, kowtowing as many times as was required to satisfy the mountain-moving ape. That had not been a joke, and it once again showed that there was often much ambiguity in how people dealt with one another. Even though there was a brief period during which he and Lu Zhimao had been allies, Downtrodden Mountain hadn't offered its congratulations to the latter in the wake of his breakthrough to the upper 5 tiers. There were two situations in life in which one would bow their head to others. The first scenario would be if one had no choice but to comply due to circumstances, while the second would be in the pursuit of maximizing self-interest. The former scenario could often be very degrading and depressing, while the latter was generally much more enjoyable. Chen Pingan traveled to the luminous jade cliff on his talismanic boat. It had once been a place where he and Lu Jiqing had drunk tea together, but just like the Pai Fu shop, it was now his territory. However, upon his arrival, he caught sight of a familiar figure standing in the pergola on the luminous jade cliff. It was the owner of the Spring Dew Garden. Tanling Chen Pingan stowed away his talismanic boat, then quickly made his way to the pergola. Tanling walked down the steps of the pergola with a smile as she said, "I heard that Sword Immortal was gracing our Spring Dew Garden with his presence, and I didn't really have anything better to do, so I decided to pay you a visit. Please pardon me for coming uninvited." "Not at all, Mistress Tan. You are always welcome here," Chen Pingan said with a smile, and the two of them made their way into the pergola before sitting down across from each other. Tanling smiled as she offered Chen Pingan the most recent anthology of the Spring Dew Garden from the end of the previous winter, and she said, "This is the most recent edition of Spring Dew in Winter. After it was published and released, we learned that the story about your tea session with Sword Immortal Lu on the luminous jade cliff was the most popular one of all." Chen Pingan took the anthology from Tanling before flipping through it to track down the story in question. It was a very elegantly written story, and he decided that he would show it to Pei Qian once he got the chance. Chen Pingan tucked the book up his sleeve, then cast his gaze toward the luminous jade cliff and the deep stream at the foot of the cliff as he sighed. "It's truly quite regrettable that I've missed 2 spring farewell banquets in a row. After I depart this time, I don't know when I'll be able to return to the Spring Dew Garden." Tanling was actually rather perplexed about why Chen Pingan seemed to have taken such a liking to her Spring Dew Garden. During their first meeting, Tanling's demeanor toward Chen Pingan had been polite but slightly distant and aloof. For her in the Spring Dew Garden, there was no need for any additional business. All she had to do was maintain the status quo and take a safe and steady approach. However, not long after Chen Pingan left the Spring Dew Garden, there came news of a certain Sword Immortal releasing their flying swords to the heavens together with Lu Jinglong of the Great Emblem Sword sect in the nearby Sacred Lotus Nation. One of them, in particular, was a streak of golden sword light that had pierced through the night sky, reminiscent of the streak of golden light that had sliced through the lightning cloud of the Golden Crow Palace, and Tanling had immediately realized the possible connection between the two. A swordsman who was merely an acquaintance of Lu Jiqing's was someone that Tanling would meet and chat briefly with, but nothing beyond that. However, a swordsman who was not only a good friend of Lu Jiqing's but was also able to journey with Lu Jinglong and release their flying swords alongside him was an entirely different concept, and Tanling would be a fool not to afford them a bit more respect and hospitality. In fact, Tanling had even considered going to the Pai Fu shop to see Chen Pingan, but she was worried that such a drastic change in attitude from their previous meeting to this one would make her come across as excessively eager to please, thereby making Chen Pingan look down on both her and the Spring Dew Garden. Inside the pergola, the two of them conversed with each other in a polite and cordial fashion. Tanling felt like she had accomplished her objective for this trip, and after a brief chat, she stood up to depart. Chen Pingan escorted her out of the pergola, then watched as she rose up into the sky and faded away into the distance. Following Tanling's departure, Chen Pingan wrote 3 secret letters, then paid a visit to the Spring Dew Garden sword chamber and sent the letters to the Great Emblem Sword Sect, Cloudtop City, and the Golden Crow Palace. Of course, he had enclosed a batch of tea leaves with the letter sent to Qi Jinglong. In the letter, he requested Qi Jinglong to purchase some replica swords and treasures from Hatred Sword Mountain and the 3 official attendant temple, respectively. He gave Qi Jinglong an allowance of 100 grain rain coins and requested the latter to go and make the purchases after facing his 3 challengers in battle. At the very minimum, he wanted a Sword Immortal replica sword from Hatred Sword Mountain and a suit of treasured armor from the 3 official attendant temple. If 100 grain rain coins weren't enough, then Qi Jinglong would just have to make up the difference out of his own pocket for now. Conversely, if there was still some money left over after making those purchases, then Qi Jinglong could look into purchasing an additional replica sword from Hatred Sword Mountain and some miscellaneous treasures from the 3 official attendant temple at his own discretion. Chen Pingan also specifically requested that Qi Jinglong take full advantage of his status as an upper 5-tier sword immortal. During the bartering process, if things weren't going smoothly, then he wanted Qi Jinglong to shamelessly mention that he was Lu Jinglong of the Great Emblem Sword sect repeatedly to try to secure the desired discount. At the end of the letter, he wished Qi Jinglong luck in his 3 battles against Li Kai, Dongzhu and Bai Shang. In the letter sent to Su Xingjiu, he wrote that he had already met with Lu Jinglong, and he claimed that the latter had told him that he wished he could have drunk more wine with Su Xingzhou during his visit. He claimed that Lu Jinglong had to abstain from drinking in the lead-up to his 3 battles, but he had expressed a high level of approval for the wine that Su Xingzhou had brought. Hence, he encouraged Su Xingzhou to travel to the Great Emblem Sword sect to visit Lu Jinglong once again after he was finished with his 3 battles, at which point Lu Jinglong would be able to drink to his heart's content. He also requested Su Xingzhou to pass on a message to Bai Shou, and tell him that once he left the Great Emblem Sword sect to explore the world in the future, he could consider paying a visit to Downtrodden Mountain of the Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. At the end of the letter, he told Su Xingzhou that if he wished to send a letter in reply, then he could send it to the Flax Robe sect of Skeleton Shoal. He told Su Xingzhou to make the letter's recipient Pang Lanxi of the Wood Garment Mountain Ancestral Hall, and request Pang Lanxi to pass the letter on to Chan Haoren. The final letter was sent to Smelting Peak of the Golden Crow Palace, and its recipient was naturally the former owner of the luminous Jade Cliff, Lu Jiqing. It was a very short letter that read, "Cultivation of the heart is no easy task, but I will persevere with you. Once I return to Skeleton Shoal, I'll be sure to request a set of Divine Maiden portraits from Mr. Peng for you." After returning to the luminous Jade Cliff, Chen Pingan sat alone in the pergola, lost in thought for quite some time. The immortal ship traveling between the Spring Dew Garden and Skeleton Shoal would only arrive at the Talisman Water Ferry Station in 2 days. It felt like he had a huge list of things to do during that time but also nothing to do at all. After some thought, Chen Pingan left the pergola, then rolled up his sleeves and pant sleeves before wading into the stream to pick up stones. Song Lanxiao was feeling rather uneasy. The source of his unease was a terrifying passenger who was traveling on his ship. It was a white-robed young man headed to the Spring Dew Garden. The earlier attack on Skeleton Wall City had commenced very abruptly and concluded very quickly, so Song Lanxiao wasn't able to personally bear witness to the incident. However, all official cultivators with any status to speak of were very adept at one thing: gathering information from all kinds of connections and sources before making extrapolations. As soon as the white-robed young man boarded the ship, Song Lanxiao immediately sent a flying sword letter to the Spring Dew Garden Ancestral Hall, warning them to be on their guard. He told them that the young man had a very peculiar personality, and that the first thing that he did after reaching Skeleton Shoal was to tear open the heavens of malicious Ghost Valley before raining down a torrential storm of treasures upon Gao Chang. What was most perplexing and surprising of all was that Gao Chang, who possessed what was equivalent to an immortal tier cultivation base, had chosen not to pursue the insolent young man. Clearly, this was someone who could destroy the entire Spring Dew Garden on a whim. As the immortal ship was traveling toward the Spring Dew Garden, the white-robed young man snuck out of the ship on one occasion to visit verdant Bamboo Lake. However, he then quickly returned to the ship, traversing through the air by performing a rather comical doggy paddle stroke. All of this had taken place in the dead of night, and if it weren't for the fact that the uneasy Song Lanxiao had been extra vigilant over these past few days, keeping a close eye on his ship day and night, he would have never been able to imagine that the white-robed young man would possess such unfathomable power. The Spring Dew Garden immortal ship was riddled with restrictions, yet the white-robed young man had been able to come and go as he pleased without any impediment, and that left Song Lanxiao feeling even more terrified. Through his observation, Song Lanxiao noticed that the young man seemed to have had a great deal of free time on his hands, and he often left his cabin to wander aimlessly on the deck of the ship. As the ship drew closer to the Spring Dew Garden, the young man began displaying clear signs of impatience, seemingly displeased with how slowly the ship was traveling. However, for some reason, he chose not to depart from the ship and travel by flight, even though he was perfectly capable of doing so, and that would have also allowed him to reach his destination faster. On this day, the young man came to see Song Lanxiao of his own accord, and he didn't waste any time with small talk as he asked in a direct and straightforward manner, "How has business for the Pai Fu shop on Old Locust Street been recently?" Song Lanxiao hadn't detected the young man's presence at all right up until the latter began to speak, and he tentatively asked, "Are you a friend of Sword Immortal Chen's, Senior? Do you have any idea what you're saying?" The young man snapped in a furious voice. "How could we possibly be friends?" Song Lanxiao's unease instantly deepened at the sight of the young man's reaction to his question. Could it be that he's an enemy of Sword Immortal Chen? Does that mean our Spring Dew Garden will be implicated? What should I do? Do you know him? The young man asked. Song Lanqiao was very conflicted on how he should answer, but ultimately, he decided to come clean and be honest, replying, I am indeed familiar with Sword Immortal Chan. In fact, he traveled on my ship the first time he went to the Spring Dew Garden. To his surprise, the young man slapped a hand firmly down onto his shoulder with a bright smile as he praised. Well done. You've earned yourself a bit of leeway. Song Lanqiao stumbled involuntarily under the force of the young man's firm hand, and he was dazed by the latter's sudden and drastic emotional swing. The young man's bright smile remained as he gestured for Song Lanqiao to sit down and have some tea, and the latter complied, sitting down in an uneasy fashion before hurriedly accepting the teacup being offered to him. Even though they were on his ship, it felt to Song Lanqiao like he was on the young man's territory. The young man didn't drink any tea himself. Instead, he set his bamboo hiking pole down onto the table, then folded his hands over one another with a smile as he said, Cui Dongshan is my name. If you are an acquaintance of my teacher, then you are a friend of mine. Song Lanqiao was feeling more puzzled by the second. He could count off all of the upper 5 tiers cultivators of the Eastern Treasured Vile continent, and he had never heard of a Cui Dongshan before. There was one with the Cui surname that he knew of, namely Imperial Preceptor Cui Chan of the Greatly Empire. Even among the cultivators at the pinnacle of the Northern Complete Reed continent, he was a very renowned figure. Furthermore, he was perplexed at the notion that Cui Dongshan was supposedly Chen Pingan's student. It wasn't that he had a low opinion of Chen Pingan, but this simply didn't make sense to him. My teacher is a very nostalgic man, so he'll be sure to visit your Spring Dew Garden before returning to Wood Garment Mountain, Cui Dongshan said with a smile. Most importantly, there was an old locust tree there, and that was why Cui Dongshan was so confident that he would find Chen Pingan there. Sword Immortal Chan is your teacher? Song Lanqiao asked in a tentative fashion. Are you envious or something? Cui Dongshan scoffed. Let me tell you now that you have no chance. When it comes to choosing disciples and students, my teacher only picks the cream of the crop. Song Lanqiao felt like he was in a fever dream. What in the world is happening right now? At this point, he would consider himself a close acquaintance of Chen Pingan's, and throughout all of their interactions, Chen Pingan had come across as a very reasonable and well-mannered young man, someone who was very amicable and pleasant to be around. So how did he have such a strange and erratic student? All of a sudden, a dangerous smile appeared on Cui Dongshan's face as he asked, Are you skeptical of the fact that I'm my teacher's student, or do you not believe that my teacher has a student like me? Song Lanqiao immediately felt a chill run down his spine. It sounded like Cui Dongshan had simply framed the same question in 2 different ways, but in reality, they held vastly different connotations, and he had to be extremely careful with how he answered. He didn't actually have many options, only 2 in fact. He could either praise Cui Dongshan or praise Chen Pingan, but if he were to choose the latter option, then he would be indirectly belittling Cui Dongshan. After quickly weighing up his options, he decided to once again take the honest and steady approach, explaining, I'm just shocked that someone as young as Sword Immortal Chan could have a student like you. Cui Dongshan shook his head as he lamented. What a shame. You've just lost that little bit of leeway. Song Lanqiao couldn't help but roll his eyes internally. In the face of such a strange and erratic senior, he was just glad not to lose his life. If he could survive this journey, then he would be sure to go and offer up incense to the old ancestors of the Spring Dew Garden. You should indeed go and offer up incense to your ancestors once you return to the Spring Dew Garden, Cui Dongshan said with a chuckle. Song Lanqiao's entire body instantly tensed up, bristling at the notion that Cui Dongshan was able to read his thoughts. Cui Dongshan smiled as he reassured. If you haven't done anything wrong, then you have no need to fear ghosts knocking on your door at night. I'm not a ghost and you haven't done anything wrong, so there's nothing for you to be afraid of. Song Lanqiao could only respond with a wry smile. Cui Dongshan picked up his hiking pole as he rose to his feet and declared, All right, I'm off. I'm going to try my luck to see if my teacher is already at the Spring Dew Garden. I'm sure my departure comes as a massive relief to you. Song Lanqiao felt like there was no good way for him to respond, so he simply closed his mouth and said nothing as he respectfully escorted Cui Dongshan out of the room. After making his way out into the walkway outside, Cui Dongshan gave Song Lanqiao a parting wave as he said, There's no need to escort me any further. Song Lanqiao stood on the spot in a daze, completely oblivious to the fact that his robes were drenched in cold sweat. Cui Dongshan made his way to the very front of the ship, then sprang up into the air, causing the entire ship to plummet by several hundred feet. From there, he sped away as a streak of white light, resembling a bolt of white lightning. Chen Pingan was picking through the stones in the stream when he suddenly turned in a certain direction and caught sight of Cui Dongshan. After a long dazed silence, he asked, "Is Senior Cui gone?" Cui Dongshan gave an affirmative response as he lowered his head. "How are you feeling?" Chen Pingan asked. "Not very good, teacher," Cui Dongshan replied. Chen Pingan allowed the pebbles that he had meticulously picked out to fall back into the stream as he began making his way toward the shore, and it was only now that he realized that he had become quite a bit taller than Cui Dongshan. He pressed a hand down onto Cui Dongshan's shoulder as he said, "Let's go back home together." Over at the Spring Dew Garden Ancestral Hall, the atmosphere was rather strange. Some people were looking very grim and concerned. This group included several elderly figures who were rarely seen outside the Ancestral Hall, as well as several guest elders cultivating at the Spring Dew Garden. There were also some who were merely spectating, and they weren't in a particularly bad mood. For example, there was Tang Shi, the owner of the Nightglow Grass Hall, who had always occupied the chair at the very end of the Ancestral Hall, and also Song Lanqiao's mistress. The two of them had never been particularly close with each other, but in this moment, they exchanged a glance and a nod, and both of them could see their own amusement mirrored in one another's eyes. There were also some who didn't quite know what to make of the situation, such as Tanling. Song Lanqiao had sent 2 flying sword letters in succession back to the Ancestral Hall. In the first letter, he reported that an outside cultivator of an unfathomable cultivation base had boarded his ship. It was an extremely handsome, white-robed young man, and upon arriving at Skeleton Shoal on the Flax-Robe Sex intercontinental ship, the first thing that he did was rain down a barrage of immortal treasures upon Skeleton Wall City without any warning. Gao Cheng had chosen not to retaliate, indicating that he was quite wary of the culprit. In the second letter, Song Lanqiao proclaimed that the unfathomable cultivator in question referred to Chen Pingan as his teacher. He also reported that the young man had a very strange and erratic personality, and that if a battle were to break out between the two, then Chen Pingan would surely stand no chance. Tanling presented the 2 letters to everyone, and after they had made the rounds and returned to her grasp, she gently tucked them up her sleeve as she said, "I have already personally sent a flying sword letter to Wood Garment Mountain to inquire about this person's identity, but I have yet to receive a response. Do any of you have any good ideas on how we should handle this situation? We can't just place all of our hopes in the Flax Robe sect because this person is clearly on good terms with Wood Garment Mountain. Also, I think Mr. Chen is the swordsman who released his flying swords alongside Sword Immortal Lu of the Great Emblem Sword sect in the Sacred Lotus Nation last year." Her declaration was met with complete silence. The Spring Dew Garden was considered to be a figurehead among the second-rate immortal powers of the Northern Complete Reed continent, ranking alongside the likes of the Lightning God Manor and Lion Peak. Furthermore, it had a very good reputation and a wide network of connections, and it also possessed a strong foundation. The only thing that kept it from becoming a first-rate immortal power of the continent was the lack of an unpolished Jade-tier cultivator at the helm. The Spring Dew Garden was in a very awkward situation because Tanling simply didn't possess the aptitude and wherewithal to reach the upper 5 tiers in this lifetime. In the absence of an upper 5 tiers cultivator among their ranks, the duo of Chen Pingan and this supposed student of his potentially posed a cataclysmic threat to the Spring Dew Garden, and any misstep here could lead to its destruction. "What do you think of Mr. Chen, Tang Shi?" Tanling asked. Tang Shi's chair was situated at the very end of the Ancestral Hall, closest to the entrance, and he took a moment to carefully formulate a response as he gently massaged the armrest of his chair, then replied, "I am unable to glean his cultivation base, and I also know next to nothing about him in terms of personal information. However, one thing I can speak on is his business dealings, and I can say that he's a very fair and scrupulous businessman." This was the first time that Tang Shi's words had been taken so seriously in a meeting between the members of the Spring Dew Garden's Ancestral Hall. "Young Master Chen is a very well-mannered and likable young man," Song Lanqiao's mistress chimed in with a smile. "Perhaps none of you are all that familiar with him, but I've really taken a liking to him. He went out of his way to visit me twice, And he's gifted me with a spirit tool and some tea leaves from the Rainbow Sparrow residence. I've been thinking about what I should give him in return the next time he comes to visit. I can't just make him leave empty-handed thrice. Young Master Chen even said himself that good things come in threes, so I should wait until his third visit before reciprocating him all at once. Unfortunately, I'm just an impoverished old woman, and I fear that any gift I can offer to him would be inadequate. In that case, I would not only be embarrassing myself, but I would also be putting our spring dew garden to shame. Clearly, this was a very pointed remark with some heavy implications behind it. There's no need for you to fret over something like this, junior sister Lin, Tanling said with a smile. You can choose a fitting gift from our ancestral hall today to present to Mr. Chen the next time he comes to visit. Surely that's inappropriate. Song Lanqiao's mistress exclaimed with a fake smile. I can't be such a burden to our spring dew garden. Honestly, if I sell off all of my possessions, then borrow some money from that good-for-nothing disciple of mine, I should be able to scrounge together enough for an immortal treasure. Tanling's expression remained unchanged as she smiled and said, There's no need to trouble Song Lanqiao. He's been working diligently for all these years, looking after the immortal ship, and I'm sure he already has enough on his plate. Song Lanqiao's mistress feigned a look of realization as she exclaimed, You have such a good memory, senior sister Tan. I suppose this must be the difference between a nascent tier cultivator like you and a mere golden core tier cultivator like myself. I had almost forgotten that I even had a golden core tier disciple like Song Lanqiao. All of the sly old foxes in the ancestral hall instantly perked up slightly at his facetious remark. It sounded like the old woman was planning to use this as an opportunity to drag her disciple into the ancestral hall. This was not a trivial matter. However, to everyone's surprise, the old woman continued, Let's not mention that toiling disciple of mine. He simply wasn't born to live the high life. She then turned to Tang Shi as she lamented, Guest Elder Tang here leads an even more difficult life than Song Lanqiao. He works so hard and has done so much for our spring dew garden, and yet he's still sitting so close to the door. Half of our spring dew garden's business goes through the Nightglow Grass Hall. In fact, if I recall correctly, even the chairs in this ancestral hall were crafted using funds supplied by the Nightglow Grass Hall. We've been benefiting from his hard work for far too long without giving any compensation in return. If you ask me, Tang Shi and I should swap positions. I should be the one moved to the entrance so that I'll no longer be an eyesore to everyone here. Tang Shi immediately rose to his feet, then cupped his fist as he extended a deep bow and opposed. That won't do at all. I am but a businessman whose cultivation aptitude is mediocre at best. Even though my business is doing all right, I've only been able to achieve everything I have off the back of the spring dew garden. My aptitude may be lacking, but one thing I've never lacked is self-awareness. It is already an immense honor for me just to have a seat in the ancestral hall at all. To ask for anything more would be incredibly ungrateful on my part. Even if you're not thinking for yourself, think about your daughter Tang Shi, the old woman urged. She's about to marry into the Iron Worship Residence Wei clan soon, but the Wei clan and the Emperor of the Great Guan Empire have always looked down on you for your lowly status in our spring dew garden. Perhaps you have the tolerance to bear such degrading remarks, but even as an outsider, it pains me to hear people belittle you so. I have no congratulatory gifts that I can offer to you, so the only thing I can do is swap positions with you in order to elevate your status slightly. Even though Tang Shi wasn't the one in charge of the money in the spring dew garden, he was widely renowned as the spring dew garden's chief moneymaker. Despite his lack of status and authority, his business acumen earned him a great deal of respect from everyone in the spring dew garden. Clearly, Tang Shi and the old woman had arrived at some type of mutual understanding, and they were intentionally putting on a show for everyone else. One of the senior figures present was in charge of the ancestral hall's finances, and there was a very disgruntled look on his face as he scoffed. Aren't we coming up with a plan to deal with Sword Immortal Chen and his student? Why are we suddenly talking about the impending marriage of Guest Elder Tang's daughter? The ancestral hall is a place where important matters are discussed, not a place to gather and exchange small talk and discuss trivial nonsense. If we keep getting sidetracked like this, we'll be here for hours without even addressing the matter at hand. So you're saying the marriage of Tang Xi's only daughter and the resulting alliance between the Spring Dew Garden and the Emperor of the Great Guan Empire are just matters of trivial nonsense? The old woman countered with a smile. Ah yes, I suppose to someone as powerful and authoritative as yourself, all of this is indeed just trivial nonsense. Don't try to put words into my mouth, the old man snapped as he slammed a furious hand down onto the armrest of his chair. You think we don't know what you're up to? Are we all just a bunch of blind and clueless fools in your eyes? So you're not blind and clueless? My mistake, senior brother Gao, the old woman said with a sneer. A wry smile appeared on Tang Xi's face as he watched in silence. This new ally of his was being a little too forward and aggressive, so it would be unwise of him to fan the flames even further. Instead, it was much better for him to simply wait and observe for now. Of course, these are not trivial matters, and they'll all be discussed in due time once the current crisis has been averted, Tan Ling interjected. As a matter of fact, we'll discuss those topics today, but not right now. Firstly, we need to try to ascertain the date of departure for Mr. Chan and his student. Secondly, we need to come up with a plan for how we can mitigate risk and avoid danger as much as possible during this time. As for whether we can turn this crisis into an opportunity and befriend the two of them, that is not something that we hope for, nor should it be made a priority. Lastly, who's going to be the one to approach them? We need to select someone, whether it be Song Lanxiao or someone else. However, let me make this clear in advance. Regardless of whether the outcome is positive or negative, the person sent to approach them should be rewarded for undertaking the task. Even if the outcome is less than desirable, no one is to complain or criticize that person. Anyone caught doing so will be punished in accordance with the rules of our ancestral hall. Tan Ling paused here momentarily, then smiled as she continued. If everyone comes to the conclusion that I should be the one to personally approach them, then I will gladly do so, as long as that's the decision reached by the ancestral hall. If I do a less than stellar job, then all of you can openly criticize me to my face. As the mountain master of the Spring Dew residence, I will sincerely accept all valid criticism. Around 15 minutes later, Tang Xi departed from the ancestral hall, while everyone else waited anxiously for his return. In times of crisis in particular, it becomes abundantly clear which people are actually useful, and which ones may as well not exist at all, the old woman chuckled. Tan Ling's brows furrowed slightly at this scathing remark, while the old man erupted into fury. You want to say that again, Lin Kui? What are you, deaf? The old woman countered. Gao Song, Lin Kui, both of you shut up. Tan Ling snapped. The two of them fell silent, but one was fuming, while the other wore a cold sneer. Tan Ling heaved an internal sigh. Gao Song and Lin Kui had once come very close to becoming Dao partners, and their relationship was an incredibly complex one. Should I use an observation technique to check on what's happening at the luminous Jade Cliff, Mountain Master Tan? A guest elder of the Spring Dew Garden suddenly offered. That way, if things go awry, we can be prepared in advance. The old woman sneered. We've got a deaf one already, now we've got a blind one. Tan Ling and the guest elder paid no heed to Lin Kui's insults, and the former shook her head as she replied, That's most likely not a good idea. At the very least, this student of Mr. Chen's is a nascent tier cultivator, and there's a very good chance that he's an unpolished Jade tier senior. If he's only at the nascent tier, then perhaps we could get away with it, but if he's at the unpolished Jade tier instead, then no matter how careful we are, he'll be sure to notice, and that'll place Tang Xi in great peril. The old woman sneered. Hasn't Tang Xi always been considered to be an outsider of the Spring Dew Garden? There are quite a few people in this ancestral hall right now who would like nothing more than for him to drop dead, so they can seize his estate. If we get Tang Xi killed, surely young Master Chan and his student will be appeased, and the Spring Dew Garden will get to claim his estate. It sounds like a great plan to me. The guest elder could only shake his head with a wry smile. Tan Ling was finally unable to rein in her temper any longer, springing to her feet as she glowered at the harsh old woman and snapped. Lin Kui, do you want to help Song Lanxiao claim a spot in the ancestral hall, or not? All right, I'll be quiet, the old woman said with a chuckle. In the past, I never had the chance to make my voice heard in this ancestral hall. Now that I've been given such an honor, I couldn't help but want to run my mouth a little. As long as that disciple of mine can enter the ancestral hall, even if he only gets a little stool right by the entrance, I promise that you won't get another peep out of me ever again. Lin Kuo-yi cast her gaze out of the ancestral hall as she spoke, and Tan Ling was about to reprimand her a little more to ensure that she didn't step any further out of line, but she was unable to bear the thought of doing so as she gazed upon Lin Kuo's old and wizened face. Furthermore, she agreed with Lin Kuo-yi in that it was about time that people started pulling their weight in the Spring Dew Garden Ancestral Hall. Hence, in Tan Ling's eyes, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing that Tang Shi, Song Lanxiao, and Lin Kuo-yi had forged an alliance. Instead of traveling by flight, Tang Shi made his way to the luminous Jade Cliff on a Spring Dew Garden talismanic boat. From afar, Tang Shi spotted Chen Pingan and his student picking up pebbles as they waded through the stream. It was certainly a serene and relaxing sight compared with the tense scenes back in the ancestral hall. Chen Pingan had heard that Song Lanxiao's ship would arrive at the Talisman Water Ferry Station the next day, and he was content to wait with Cui Dongshan. The two of them returned to the stream, picking and choosing their way through the pebbles while Cui Dongshan told Chen Pingan about his intercontinental journey. At the mention of Skeleton Shoal and Skeleton Wall City, Chen Pingan raised a question. He knew that sect leader Zhu Quan of the Flax Robe sect was currently stationed in a small town, and he wondered if Gao Cheng and his forces would be able to eradicate that small town and remove that thorn in his side in one fell swoop if he really wanted to. Cui Dongshan answered without any hesitation, telling Chen Pingan that the answer was very simple. If Zhu Quan were willing to flee the scene, then of course she would be able to slip away and return to Wood Garment Mountain. However, given her personality, she was almost certainly going to fight to her death in malicious Ghost Valley. She would sacrifice both her life and the formation in Green Cottage Town to deal Skeleton Wall City a heavy blow and buy time for the next generation of Wood Garment Mountain to grow and develop, including the likes of Du Wenxi and Pang Lanqi. However, Cui Dongshan also revealed that Gao Cheng had some other plans for Zhu Quan, and that was why he was happy to maintain the status quo instead of declaring war. How do you know so much when you were only in Skeleton Shoal for such a short time? Chen Pingan asked with a smile. Attention to detail is one of my few limited skills, Cui Dongshan replied with a smile. I have gathered a decent amount of information on Gao Cheng so far on this journey through the northern complete reed continent. Additionally, the Flax Robe sect also helped me out, and I was able to obtain Gao Cheng's precise birth date, 8 characters, birthplace, and the feng shui of his clan's ancestral grave. Normally, none of this information would be of any consequence. For any cultivator of the northern complete reed continent, even an immortal tier 1 wouldn't be able to use this information to inflict any substantial harm upon Skeleton Wall City. Unfortunately for Gao Cheng, this information has ended up in my hands, and as a result, it's become very much consequential. Chen Pingan picked up a pristine white pebble before placing it into a makeshift pouch that he had fashioned out of the front of his robe, then said, "It was really quite shady of Gao Cheng to do what he did to Zhou Mili." "Indeed," Cui Dongshan agreed with a nod. "I'd even go as far as to say it was downright scummy. Right now, Brother Gao has a brother. I didn't bring him with me on this journey, but you should go and see him when you get the chance, teacher. He's quite a handsome boy, but he's not the brightest." "Is he similar to Mr. Li's scholarly attendant?" Chen Pingan asked. Cui Dongshan nodded as he explained, "I used one as practice while the other was handled much more meticulously, so they're a little different." Chen Pingan hesitated momentarily, then said, "If it's possible, I would like to ideally treat him as a real human being someday. Having said that, I'll let you be the judge of whether that would be a good idea. I'm just telling you what I would like to see, but you don't have to go out of your way to try and make it happen if it's unfeasible. The teacher's wish is the student's command," Cui Dongshan said with a wide smile. The two of them then fell silent as they detected Tang Shi and the approaching talismanic boat. Tang Shi slowly arrived at the bank of the stream, then extended a respectful bow as he greeted. Tang Shi of the Nightglow Grass Hall pays his respects to Mr. Chen. Chen Pingan held onto his pouch full of pebbles with one hand as he waved at Tang Shi with the other, greeting Tang Shi with a smile as he emerged from the stream. Cui Dongshan's pouch was filled with even more pebbles, all of which were also of a greater size, so he was forced to grip it with both hands, giving him a rather comical appearance. Chen Pingan and Tang Shi walked alongside each other, and the latter declared in a direct and straightforward manner, "The Spring Dew Garden Ancestral Hall is a little concerned, so I've been sent here to see you. Please pardon my intrusion, Mr. Chen." Tell Mistress Tan that she has nothing to worry about, Chen Pingan said with a reassuring smile. My disciple and I will set off for Skeleton Shoal tomorrow on Senior Song's ship. And you have my word that the two of us won't cause any trouble for the Spring Dew Garden. Otherwise, we would be repaying kindness with ingratitude. I owe the Spring Dew Garden many favors, from this luminous jade cliff to the Pai Fu shop on Old Locust Street. And that's not even to mention you and Senior Lin. Once I get to Wood Garment Mountain, I'll try to put in a good word for the Spring Dew Garden with my acquaintances there. The Spring Dew Garden is on good terms with the Flax Robe sect to begin with, and hopefully, I can do my part to further increase business dealings between the two. However, I'm just one person with limited influence, so I can't make any promises on whether my words will actually have an effect. If it turns out that my words fall upon deaf ears, I hope you won't turn me away from your Nightglow Grass Hall the next time I visit the Spring Dew Garden. Tang Shi was very relieved to hear this, and a hint of genuine gratitude welled up in his heart as he extended another bow and said, I won't forget what you've done for me, Mr. Chen. Shopkeeper Wang Tingfang is doing a great job with the shop, so there's no need for you to keep too close an eye on it from now on, Chen Pingan said with a smile. Otherwise, I'll feel indebted to you, and Shopkeeper Wang will also feel very pressured. In that case, I'll leave it to Wang Tingfang, Tang Shi replied with a nod. But rest assured, if he begins to stray down the wrong path, I'll be sure to whip him back into shape. He already has a very easy job. If he dares to slack off, then his integrity will need to be called into question, and my Nightglow Grass Hall will be to blame for failing to instill the correct values into him. If that happens, then the next time you come to my Nightglow Grass Hall for tea, I'll start off by drinking 3 cups of wine as a punishment, and only then will I dare to drink tea with you. Chen Pingan smiled and nodded in response. Tang Xing was not one to dilly-dally, and with his objective completed, he bade farewell to Chen Pingan and set off back to the ancestral hall. As opposed to traveling at a leisurely pace on his talismanic boat, he flew straight back as quickly as he could. Cui Dongshan didn't utter even a single word the entire time. Looks like I command a lot more respect with you here, Chen Pingan remarked as he turned to Cui Dongshan. It's only natural for a teacher to reprimand his student, Cui Dongshan said in a serious manner. Chen Pingan chuckled in exasperation. What are you talking about? The two of them strode over to the pergola, and Chen Pingan sat down on the steps. Cui Dongshan sat down beside him, and it was unclear whether this was intentional, but he sat down a step below Chen Pingan. The duo had already piled their pebbles together, and at this moment Cui Dongshan was leaning back, supporting his upper body with his elbows on a higher step as he cast his gaze into the distance. Even though it was already autumn, the scenery remained as lush and green as ever. It seemed that for the Spring Dew Garden all 4 seasons were spring. Chen Pingan rolled down his sleeves and pant sleeves, but remained barefoot. His shoes were in the pergola behind him, pointing at the bench. Cui Dongshan's hiking pole was resting diagonally against a pillar of the pergola. A smile appeared on Chen Pingan's face as he mused. Back when I was an apprentice at the dragon kiln, I looked at the soil everywhere I went, trying to see if it would be suitable for firing pottery. After becoming a traveling salesman, I began looking for money-making opportunities everywhere I went, trying to see where I could earn more money. Selecting the right soil is very important, and the pottery firing process is even more important. Regardless of how beautiful a piece of pottery looks before going into the kiln, it would inevitably be ruined if something went even slightly wrong in the firing process. The hard work of dozens of people toiling away for at least half a year would all go to waste. And that's why Old Man Yao always insisted on overseeing the firing process himself. Even his most prized disciple, Lu Xianyang, was never permitted to take on such an important responsibility. Old Man Yao would stay up for entire nights, sitting on his stool, constantly watching the fire. However, one thing he often liked to say was that no matter how much care and attention he gave, once a piece of pottery entered the kiln, it was entirely up to the will of the heavens to decide the final outcome. In practice, this turned out to be true. The vast majority of the pieces that we produced ultimately became a part of the mountain of porcelain. At the time, what we were told was that these pieces of chinaware were to be personally used by the emperor, which was why even the slightest of imperfections was unacceptable. Back then, the concept of the emperor felt so distant and abstract, almost like a deity in the sky. Then again, back then, everything felt lofty and distant. The top of the old locust tree, the summit of the mountain of porcelain, everything felt so distant and far away. Even the journey into the mountains to chop wood for coal felt impossibly far. At the very least, it was much further than the journey I had to undertake in order to pick medicinal herbs from the mountains as a child. Cui Dongshan had been listening this entire time in an absent-minded manner, but he finally broke his silence as he said, "When I was locked in the pavilion and forced to read as a child, I had no sense of whether I was high up or not. I could only look into the distance through that tiny little window. Back then, books were the things that I detested the most. I have a very good memory that retains everything I see and read, so even though I detested the books, I had memorized all of their contents. At the time, I swore to myself that when it came time for me to find a teacher, I would be sure to find the least learned one possible, one with the fewest books in their collection, and one who wouldn't try to restrict my freedom. That led me to the old scholar, who was just barely getting by in that shoddy alley. In the beginning, I thought I had found the perfect teacher to match my criteria, and it was only afterward that I realized the teacher that I had found for myself was much more learned than I had first thought. After that, I began traveling the world with the old scholar. Back then, he was still nowhere near the scholarly sage that he would eventually become, and we received a lot of ridicule, but we also encountered many true intellectuals. By the time the old scholar declared that he was going to write a book, we had already traveled a very long way. At the time, he had been extremely confident, declaring that if his book could be published, then it would sell at least 1,000 copies, and that it was sure to be sold to other provinces and prefectures. He was speaking very loudly when he made this bold declaration, so I knew that he was nowhere near as confident as he was trying to come across, and he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. She initially chose me because of Mr. Qi, so it didn't actually have much to do with me, Chen Pingan said with a smile. It's the same as why you were so insistent on becoming my student. You were only forced into it by the scholarly sage, and it didn't have much to do with me in the beginning either. Cui Dongshan wanted to say something, but Chen Pingan waved a dismissive hand as he continued. It may not have had much to do with me, but it still did have a little to do with me. At a certain moment in time I was that singularity, a tiny one, but still one that served as an origin point to everything that followed. This is not something that's unfamiliar to me. In fact, to me, there are even bigger singularities that encompass the entirety of many things. For example, after my father left and my mother fell ill, I became the sole and entire singularity. If I hadn't done anything, then there would have truly been nothing left. Back then, the gate of Gukan's courtyard and the bowl of rice sitting on their table had also been an entire singularity in itself. If they hadn't opened the gate to let me in, perhaps I would have found some other way to survive, but I definitely wouldn't be the same Chen Pingan sitting here and talking to you right now. Chen Pingan closed his hand into a loose fist, then tapped it against his own chest as he continued. When we become very attached to this world, our lives become an arduous toil that's filled with hardship. Thankfully, I'm afraid of everything but enduring hardship. In fact, the more I have to toil, the more it feels to me like there's proof that I'm actually living in this world. At least I have to tell myself that. Otherwise, living will feel like an even more arduous grind. As your teacher, this is the one thing I'm superior to you in, but don't try to learn it from me. It's not that it's a bad trait. It's just that it's simply not necessary for you. Cui Dongshan nodded in response. Chen Pingan leaned back, resting the back of his head onto a makeshift pillow formed by his folded hands as he asked, Chao Qinglang is the reason why Pei Qian suddenly decided to pursue martial arts, right? Cui Dongshan gave an affirmative response. Chen Pingan had guessed that Pei Qian had begun studying martial arts, just as he had guessed the reason behind her decision. Once I see her again, I'll tell her that it's all right for her to miss Senior Cui, but she shouldn't feel guilty over his passing, Chen Pingan said. Ideally, she would nod and agree, but be unable to do it in practice, and I'm sure that's going to be the case. Pei Qian, you mean? We're actually all the same. We know all the principles, but we're still unable to get over ourselves. After she grows up, she'll feel a pang of guilt and sadness every time she returns home. But the older she gets, the better she'll be able to hide it. For her, the bamboo building on Downtrodden Mountain will be a mental hurdle. She was able to overcome the mental hurdle she once had in the Southern Garden Nation thanks to her journey with Senior Cui. But now that Senior Cui is gone, a new mental hurdle has taken its place, one that she'll never be able to overcome. Having said that, I don't think it's a bad thing to have certain insurmountable mental hurdles in life that you can only sneak around. Chen Pingan's voice trailed off into silence, and Cui Dongshan turned to discover that the former's eyes were closed, seemingly having fallen asleep. Cui Dongshan also closed his eyes as he allowed his thoughts to wander, and all that remained was the ambient sound of the flowing water in the stream. Feeling very secure and serene, Cui Dongshan also fell asleep. Sometime later, Cui Dongshan suddenly said, "How sad you will be to see little Baoping and Pei Qian all grown up is how glad Qi Jingchun would have been to see you grow up." Chen Pingan didn't say anything, and it seemed that he was still sleeping. After a long silence, Cui Dongshan called out, "Master, I'm here." Chen Pingan replied in a quiet voice. Chen Pingan and Cui Dongshan paid a visit to the Pai Fu shop on Old Locust Street. Chen Pingan was sitting on the little bamboo chair at the entrance, basking in the warm autumn sun. Cui Dongshan dismissed shopkeeper Wang Tingfang, telling the latter that he could rest for a day. Wang Tingfang was perplexed, but he complied and departed from the Pai Fu shop after receiving a smile and a nod from Chen Pingan. Business turned out to be quite good for the day because word quickly spread that an incredibly handsome young man had come to the Pai Fu shop. Hence, most of the customers for the day were young female cultivators, and Cui Dongshan could be very convincing when he wanted to be, so he was able to earn a lot of money for the shop. His sales tactics weren't always as scrupulous as they could have been, but Chen Pingan let him do as he pleased. The next day, Tan Ling appeared at the Talisman Water Ferry Station with Tang Shi, and of course Song Lanqiao was also with them. After exchanging some small talk, Chen Pingan and Cui Dongshan boarded the ship, accompanied by Song Lanqiao. No matter how he looked at the unlikely duo, Song Lanqiao found himself struggling to connect the young sword immortal and the white-robed young man. In particular, it was downright unimaginable to him that they could be teacher and student. However, at the same time there was some type of unexplainable harmony and cohesion between the two. Could it be because both of them were carrying bamboo hiking poles? Song Lanqiao didn't dare to say much, only reporting a piece of good news to Chen Pingan before expressing his genuine gratitude. As it turned out, he had just been given a chair in the Spring Dew Garden's ancestral hall. Just like Tang Shi, his chair was right at the entrance of the ancestral hall, making the duo appear like a pair of door gods for the ancestral hall, but this was a monumental honor that Song Lanqiao hadn't even dared to yearn for in the past, and on top of that, his newfound status came with a huge additional annual allowance of immortal coins. It was no exaggeration to say that Song Lanqiao had received an immense blessing from Chen Pingan, but he was very intelligent in his handling of the situation. Having been a businessman for so long, he had developed a very pragmatic approach, and he wisely chose not to suck up to Chen Pingan excessively in an effort to appease him. On the ship, Song Lanqiao arranged for the two of them a premium cabin, and after some thought, he decided not to send in any maidservants. Inside the cabin, Cui Dongshan poured Chen Pingan a cup of tea, then sprawled down onto the table, his two huge white sleeves taking up close to half of the table's surface area as he smiled and said, "In a fight, even 10 Spring Dew Gardens wouldn't be able to match up against a single flax robe sect, but when it comes to doing business, the Spring Dew Garden doesn't lose to the flax robe sect at all. I am anticipating a long and prosperous business relationship between the Spring Dew Garden and our downtrodden mountain in the future." Chen Pingan merely sipped his tea and didn't say anything. At the moment, the Spring Dew Garden has already maximized its business potential, so Tanling's main objective is to maintain the status quo. Cui Dongshan continued. In the immortal world, she's fixated on attaching the Spring Dew Garden to the Flax Robe sect, while in the mortal world, she's primarily drawing in the Great Guan Empire. There's nothing wrong with her overall strategy, but over time she's begun to realize the downside of her approach, which is that many senior figures have grown accustomed to benefiting from the work of others, but there are far too few people doing the actual work. In the past, even if she wanted to support Tang Shi, it would have simply been too risky for her to do so. Gao Song is the one officially in charge of the Spring Dew Garden's finances, but he's just an incompetent fool who only knows how to acquire money at all costs. If he and Tang Shi were to forge a secret alliance, then the consequences for her would be catastrophic, and the entire Spring Dew Garden would be turned upside down. There are quite a few disciples in Tanling's branch, but none who can actually make a difference, so essentially, she's all on her own, and an alliance between Tang Shi and Gao Song would be too formidable for her to oppose. She wouldn't be able to beat them in battle, and needless to say, they would also have her thoroughly beaten in terms of wealth. Hence, an alliance between Tang Xi and Lin Qiuyi is actually a desirable outcome for Tan Ling. Even though Lin Qiuyi has a foul temper, she's lacking in ambition, and she's also quite loyal to the Spring Dew Garden. Now that Song Lanxiao has been granted a seat in the ancestral hall, he will surely be extremely grateful to Tan Ling, and things are suddenly starting to look up for the Spring Dew Garden. If our downtrodden mountain gives them a helping hand, allowing them to extend their business to the Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, then that would serve as a significant morale boost for everyone in the Spring Dew Garden. Right now, there are countless projects, both major and minor, being carried out across the entirety of the Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. The Spring Dew Garden has manpower, resources, and money, and their needs perfectly complement those of our downtrodden mountain, thereby making them the ideal business partner. However, we also have to be wary of the notion that the Spring Dew Garden could experience growing pains on the Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, but ultimately, I'm sure this will be of benefit to everyone involved. And to think that you planned all of this from the very beginning. Your wisdom and foresight are truly unmatched, teacher. Chen Pingan was unable to suppress an amused chuckle as he accused, "You must be the reason why everyone on Downtrodden Mountain has turned into insincere suck-ups. That's a completely unfair assessment." Cui Dongshan protested in an indignant voice. "Chef Zhu, my senior sister, and Brother Dafeng are all masters of flattery. Besides, who says they're being insincere? All of their flattery comes straight from the heart. To tell you the truth, I didn't have any plans of working with the Spring Dew Garden," Chen Pingan said. "I didn't even dare to consider such a thing. I was very content just to do some business here as a traveling salesman. If we can make it happen, then you should be taking the majority of the credit." Cui Dongshan raised a hand before tapping a finger down onto the surface of the table thrice, marking out 3 points in a triangular formation as he said, "Tang Xi, Lin Qiuyi, and Song Lanxiao form one trifecta. Tan Ling's branch, Gao Song's branch, and Tang Xi's Nightglow Grass Hall form another trifecta. Downtrodden Mountain, the Flax Robe Sect, and the Spring Dew Garden are yet another trifecta of their own. All of the powers that you've united in the southern region of the Northern Complete Reed Continent and the northern region of the Eastern Treasured Vile Continent form an even bigger trifecta. You were the one who orchestrated all of this, yet I should be the one to take the majority of the credit? That's absurd, teacher." Chen Pingan shook his head with a smile as he said, "I was merely lucky. Your poise and modesty are truly unmatched, teacher," Cui Dongshan said with a sigh. "There you go again." Chen Pingan exclaimed in exasperation. Cui Dongshan was just about to open his mouth to speak when Chen Pingan cut him off with a stern glare. "That's enough flattery from you." Cui Dongshan felt like his extensive arsenal of weapons and tricks had been rendered completely useless. Sure enough, the student still had much to learn from the teacher. "Should we go pay a visit to Gaocheng once we reach Skeleton Shoal?" Cui Dongshan suddenly asked. "You won't have to worry about your safety as long as I'm with you." "I won't go to Skeleton Wall City for now," Chen Pingan replied with a shake of his head. "Is it because you developed some admiration for him after he split open the heavens to allow Pu Rang to release his flying swords in commemoration of the fallen sword immortal at the Sword Qi Great Wall?" Cui Dongshan asked. "It's more complicated than that. I'll tell you my reasons some other time," Chen Pingan replied. Cui Dongshan raised no objections. As the immortal ship was passing over Imperial Accompanying City and Verdant Bamboo Lake, Chen Pingan left the cabin, and Cui Dongshan stood with him by the railing of the ship, looking down at the landscape below. From their vantage point high up in the sky, the vast verdant bamboo lake resembled a green stone lying peacefully in the stream at the foot of the luminous jade cliff. "Please don't take such risks in the future, teacher," Cui Dongshan urged in a quiet voice. Chen Pingan sighed. "I wish I could make that promise to you. I have genuinely been trying to keep myself out of trouble, telling myself that now that I'm a cultivator, I should distance myself from the affairs of the mortal world, but you and I both know that it's easier said than done sometimes." Cui Dongshan was leaning over the railing, his sleeves spilling down the side of the ship like a pair of miniature white waterfalls. "Is Zhou Mili doing well on Downtrodden Mountain?" Chen Pingan asked. "She's doing great," Cui Dongshan replied with a nod. "She thinks that Pei Qian is an intellectual just because she makes transcriptions every day. and she's waiting for Pei Qian to write her a story, detailing her feats as the great water monster of Mute Lake. She's constantly following Pei Qian around like a little lackey, carrying her hiking pole for her like it's some badge of honor. Recently, she was promoted from the right-hand guardian of Dragon Riding Alley to the right-hand guardian of Downtrodden Mountain, and before she speaks to anyone, she always makes sure to clear her throat first before clasping her hands behind her back like she's some seasoned old scholar, a habit that she undoubtedly picked up from Pei Qian. I'm glad to hear that, Chen Pingan said with a smile. Are you really planning to put her in the genealogical records of the Downtrodden Mountain Ancestral Hall? Cui Dongshan asked. Of course, Chen Pingan replied. This is no laughing matter. Before this, I was a little hesitant, but after witnessing all of the factions and the subtle undercurrents of the Spring Dew Garden, I made up my mind. My goal is to make our downtrodden mountain appear strange and inexplicable to outsiders. I'm aware of the costs of taking such an approach, but I can strive to make up for those losses elsewhere. I'm not opposed to the idea of our downtrodden mountain becoming a powerful sect further down the line, but I'm not going to discard the flowers and plants that I encounter along the way for that objective. Those flowers and plants have never been considered expendable on Downtrodden Mountain, and they won't be expendable in the future, either. They're not just pieces of scenery to be appreciated and forgotten. Instead, they are all a part of my life. It puts me particularly at ease to be able to look after those who deserve to be looked after. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense, and you have my full support, teacher. Cui Dongshan replied with a firm nod. But it's definitely not going to be easy, Chen Pingan remarked with a sigh. It's always been easy to make bold declarations, but putting one's money where their mouth is has never been an easy endeavor, Cui Dongshan said. There were some things that he didn't want to say. The joy from all long-awaited reunions would eventually translate to the sorrow of separation. That didn't stop people from feeling the same joy from future reunions, but it was also important to remember that some separations were permanent, and there was no reunion at the end of the tunnel. Chen Pingan leaned over the railing as well, looking down at the sea of clouds that had been illuminated a golden color by the light of the sun as he asked, "Does it feel like a pain to be my disciple?" "Not at all," Cui Dongshan replied. Chen Pingan chuckled. "Of course not. Never in history has there been a student so far superior to their master in both cultivation base and knowledge." "I have to disagree with that, teacher," Cui Dongshan said. "Are you saying it will be a pain for you if Pei Qian progresses rapidly in her cultivation base, making breakthroughs as quickly as Zhou Mili goes through bowls of rice in a meal?" "Of course," Chen Pingan replied with a nod. "My authority as her master would be completely thrown out the window if her cultivation base outstripped mine. How can I reprimand her when I'm constantly worried that she could give me a beating anytime she pleased?" Cui Dongshan erupted into laughter. Clearly, this northbound journey had done wonders for his teacher's mental state. After a brief silence, Chen Pingan said, "I'm a very inflexible person who's prone to splitting hairs and driving myself into corners. Someday, an objectively trivial problem on Downtrodden Mountain will feel like a huge dilemma to me. When that time comes, I want you to give me some suggestions." "You can count on me, teacher," Cui Dongshan replied. "Don't forget about how accomplished and respected I once was. My intellect was like a sharp spike in a cloth bag. I couldn't keep it from showing even if I tried. I don't mean to brag, but I could have easily claimed the position of Mountain Master of the Confucian School had that been my objective. If I wanted to be a bit more of a profiteer, then I could have become an assistant sect master of the Middle-earth Confucian Temple. I would believe it if the Imperial Preceptor told me that, but it's hardly convincing coming from you," Chen Pingan scoffed with a shake of his head. "Take care that you don't sprain your tongue with all this bragging." Cui Dongshan chuckled. "A seasoned bragger like me doesn't have to worry about such a thing. The Middle-earth Divine Continent must be a massive place, right?" Chen Pingan asked. "It is," Cui Dongshan confirmed with a nod. "Only the other 8 continents combined can compare with the size of the Middle-earth Divine Continent, and it's considered quite remarkable if even only 1 or 2 people from the other 8 continents could squeeze their way into the top 10 cultivators of the Middle-earth Divine Continent. We're talking about people like Chan Chunin of the Southern World Continent, Spiritual Master Fire Dragon of Mount Longhu, and the so-called God of Riches of the Pure White Continent." "I'll be sure to go there sometime," Chen Pingan said. "That's a place with many painful memories for me," Cui Dongshan complained. You asked for trouble, so you really can't blame anyone when trouble turns up at your door, Chen Pingan said with a chuckle. I can't believe you would say this, teacher, Cui Dongshan said with a sigh. As the immortal ship flew into the territory of Skeleton Shoal, Song Lanqiao came to visit, bearing 2 sets of precious gifts, one from himself and one from the Tanling. His gift was actually an immortal treasure that Lin Kui had chosen from the ancestral hall. It was a dragon-patterned scripture box crafted from immortal wood, produced only by the Spring Dew Garden, and it contained 4 jade scriptures. Tanling's gift was even more precious. It was one of a handful of the most precious treasures of the Spring Dew Garden, namely a set of 8 pieces of ink sticks. Song Lanqiao's heart ached on Tanling's behalf as he handed over the gift. Chen Pingan didn't refuse the gifts. Tanling hadn't presented the gifts to him herself back at the Talisman Water Ferry Station, instead choosing to instruct Song Lanqiao to present the gifts in her stead as the ship was about to reach Skeleton Shoal, and that was a gesture of sincerity in itself. This was the first official assignment Song Lanqiao had been given since becoming a member of the Spring Dew Garden Ancestral Hall, and much to his relief, it had gone quite smoothly. However, he still felt rather tense and apprehensive while having tea with Chen Pingan and Cui Dongshan, with the latter's presence making him feel particularly uneasy. Cui Dongshan was gently tracing the rim of his teacup with his finger as he smiled and said, You know, Lanqiao, there are plenty of people in the world who wish they could offer up certain gifts to certain people, yet never receive the opportunity. Compared with them, you are already very fortunate. It was a rather strange feeling to be treated with respect and referred to as senior Song by Chen Pingan, only to have the latter student refer to him as Lanqiao in a condescending fashion. The Spring Dew Garden had displayed plenty of sincerity, so Chen Pingan naturally wasn't just going to sit by and watch as Cui Dongshan talked down to Song Lanqiao. Thus he gave Cui Dongshan a dismissive wave, indicating that he had something to discuss with Song Lanqiao in private. However, what happened next gave Song Lanqiao such a massive fright that he also sprang up out of his chair. All of a sudden Cui Dongshan was sent flying along with his chair, as if he had just been given a vicious slap to the face. He spun around countless times in midair before he slid down the wall, still seated on his chair, and there was a sullen look on his face as he said in a timid voice, I'll just be over here if you need me, teacher. Chen Pingan could only glower at Cui Dongshan in exasperation, while Song Lanqiao was shocked beyond words. Could it be that this young sword immortal was not some earth immortal, but actually an unpolished jade tier sword immortal, just like Lu Jinglong? Chen Pingan turned his gaze away from Cui Dongshan as he got down to business with Song Lanqiao, discussing a collaboration between Downtrodden Mountain and the Spring Dew Garden. Song Lanqiao definitely didn't possess the jurisdictive power required to call the shots on such an important matter, so they were only going to discuss a rough direction here. Once he returned to the ancestral hall, it was most likely going to take many rounds of bickering to decide on the best course of action, and if the 2 sides did agree to a collaboration, then Julien Weibo and the others back on Downtrodden Mountain would have to be the ones to decide on the specific terms and details. Chen Pingan was relatively familiar with the Spring Dew Garden's business, so his conversation with Song Lanqiao went quite smoothly. All this time that he had spent posing as a traveling salesman on the northern complete reed continent certainly hadn't gone to waste. Of course, the biggest asset of Downtrodden Mountain was the Oxhorn Mountain Ferry Station. With Weibo stationed on Cloud Drape Mountain, the Oxhorn Mountain Ferry Station was able to receive the vast majority of intercontinental ships coming from the northern complete reed continent. Essentially, the ferry station served as an all-important central hub, where all of the wealth from the northern complete reed continent funneling into the eastern treasured vial continent gathered momentarily before going elsewhere. Occasionally, Chen Pingan would look at a well-worn snowflake coin and wonder to himself just how many cultivators it had seen. 1,000? 10,000? Was it possible that it had traversed across all 9 continents of the majestic world? Song Lanqiao was fully focused on his conversation with Chen Pingan. He had a feeling that the contents of their discussion could decide the overall direction of the Spring Dew Garden for the next century. However, during their conversation, Chen Pingan took a glance over at the wall, and Song Lanqiao instinctively looked in the same direction. There, Cui Dongshan had grabbed onto either side of his chair with his hands, and he was swaying back and forth, using the legs of the chair as a substitute for his own legs as he slowly waddled forward in an unsteady fashion. As soon as he noticed Chen Pingan looking, he immediately stopped what he was doing, then pretended to look elsewhere as he began whistling in an inconspicuous display. Song Lanqiao flashed him a polite smile before averting his gaze. Is he retarded? There has to be something wrong with him. Chen Pingan spoke with Song Lanqiao for over 2 hours, and both of them brought up many ideas for a potential future collaboration. As the conversation continued, Song Lanqiao became increasingly comfortable and relaxed, and it was even becoming a rather cathartic experience for him as he was finally able to express some ideas that he had held for many years but had never had a chance to share. Furthermore, Chen Pingan was very pleasant to talk to, never giving any absolute or overly concrete verdicts on Song Lanqiao's proposals and ideas. Instead, he mostly adopted very gentle and respectful rhetoric, such as, "I didn't quite understand that part. Could you please elaborate further, Senior Song?" And, "I have some different ideas on this topic. Please have a listen to what I have to say, and if you have any objections to raise, then feel free to state them." However, just because Chen Pingan wasn't quick to jump to absolute verdicts didn't mean that he was afraid of making decisions. He displayed a full willingness and readiness to take responsibility for his decisions. Meanwhile, Cui Dongshan continued to waddle along on his chair the entire time, making lap after lap around the table. Thankfully, he ensured that no sound came from his chair as he engaged in his childish game, and before long, Song Lanqiao was able to cast him completely out of his mind. By the time the conversation drew to a conclusion, there was no longer any tea left. Speaking with Chen Pingan had been a very enjoyable experience for Song Lanqiao, and he would have loved to continue the conversation, but ultimately, he stood up to announce his departure. He told Chen Pingan that there was no need to escort him, and the latter smiled and nodded in response, accompanying Song Lanqiao to the door before instructing Cui Dongshan to see him off. As Song Lanqiao made his way out into the walkway, a sense of foreboding instantly welled up in his heart as he found himself alone with Cui Dongshan, while Chen Pingan was nowhere to be seen. Cui Dongshan backed his way out of the room, then gently closed the door before turning to Song Lanqiao with a smile on his face. Song Lanqiao's own smile instantly began to stiffen. However, before he had a chance to do anything, Cui Dongshan had already jumped up and slung an arm around his neck, then began walking forward while dragging him along. "Well done, Brother Lanqiao. You offered some very interesting insights and ideas back there." Song Lanqiao was almost unable to suppress the urge to yell to Chen Pingan for help. With his heart full of fear and unease, Song Lanqiao tried to remain still and unmoving, but he was involuntarily dragged along by Cui Dongshan, and as soon as he took a step forward, he immediately knew that something was very wrong. In the next instant, Cui Dongshan was already nowhere to be seen. Song Lanqiao found himself standing amid a boundless expanse of white mist, without any discernible landmarks around him. It was as if he had stepped into a dead small world. There was nothing but empty whiteness as far as the eyes could see in all directions, and as he began to walk, he discovered that he was standing on something rather soft and loamy, but it wasn't any type of soil from this world. He stomped down forcefully to try and figure out exactly what it was he was standing on, but the ground beneath his feet merely rippled and offered no answers. He began walking forward in a tentative fashion. Around 15 minutes later he took flight. 2 hours later he had become so frantic that he had summoned a large collection of immortal treasures to try and blast his way out of this unsettling place. But the small world around him remained completely unaffected. A year later, he sat with his legs crossed and a hopeless look on his face, having already resigned himself to his fate. All of a sudden, he looked up to discover a massive head. It belonged to Cui Dongshan. There was a smile on his face, but it didn't reach his eyes, which were cold and uncaring. He slowly raised his arm, and only then did Song Lanqiao come to realize that he had been trapped in Cui Dongshan's sleeve all this time. In the next instant, he found himself standing in the walkway of the ship. Cui Dongshan was standing nearby with his hands tucked up their opposite sleeves, watching him with a faint smile. Song Lanqiao almost erupted into tears of relief. Such was his joy at being released from purgatory. "My teacher told me to see you off, but I may have gone a little overboard and escorted you a little further than you may have expected," Cui Dongshan said with a smile. "Make sure you don't go telling my teacher about this. Otherwise, next time I'll be seeing you off for a decade or perhaps even a century." Perhaps that'll teach you to keep your thoughts in check and not go around denouncing others as retards. I've learned my lesson, senior, Song Lanxiao said in a fearful manner. You've grown accustomed to the abundant spiritual energy in the Spring Dew Garden, and you've then grown accustomed to the sparse spiritual energy on this ship. So why is it that you can't acclimate yourself to the lawless place? Cui Dongshan asked. Song Lanxiao was stumped by the question. As Cui Dongshan passed Song Lanxiao by, he patted the latter on the shoulder as he said in a meaningful and heartfelt manner, "Your mental cultivation is shoddy, and your golden core may as well be made from paper." Song Lanxiao turned to face Cui Dongshan, and this time he extended an earnest bow of gratitude as he said, "Your words have truly enlightened me, senior. You haven't shown me the light at the end of the tunnel, but you've certainly pointed out the right direction for me." Cui Dongshan didn't appear to have heard him at all as he knocked on the cabin door and asked, "Would you like me to bring you some snacks and tea, teacher?" Looking at Cui Dongshan's side profile, Song Lanxiao felt as if he had just woken up from a dream spanning an entire lifetime. Chen Pingan opened the door, then pressed a hand down onto the top of Cui Dongshan's head as he asked, "Has this disciple of mine been disrespectful to you, Senior Song?" Song Lanxiao didn't know what came over him, but he suddenly had the courage to reply. "He put me through a very grueling ordeal." "I see," Chen Pingan replied with a smile and a nod. In the next instant, Cui Dongshan was pinched by the ear and dragged into the cabin by Chen Pingan, howling in pain as he went. "Song Lanxiao, you ungrateful piece of shit. Just you wait. Teacher, I was just helping Brother Lanxiao in his cultivation. I didn't show him any disrespect. Please forgive me." Song Lanxiao departed with a pleased smile. After the ship arrived at the Skeleton Shoal ferry station, Song Lanxiao didn't even turn up. Instead, he asked someone else to see Chen Pingan and Cui Dongshan off in his stead, while he made up an excuse and left the ship altogether. Cui Dongshan gently massaged his own chin as he looked around in disappointment. After disembarking from the ship, the two of them made their way to Wood Garment Mountain. On the way there, Cui Dongshan complained, "The first time Zhu Quan met me, she told me that you never mentioned me to her, and that you pretended not to know me. That really hurt me. I'm certain I mentioned you to sect leader Zhu a few times, but she's very busy as the leader of such a huge sect, and she also has to keep a constant eye on malicious Ghost Valley, so it's no surprise that she forgot," Chen Pingan explained with a smile. "Sect leader Zhu is a very rare breath of fresh air in the cultivation world, and I have a lot of respect for her, so don't go causing any trouble on Wood Garment Mountain. Also, make sure to be careful with what you say to Peng Lanxi. He's a direct disciple of the ancestral hall that the entire Wood Garment Mountain has very high hopes for. So make sure you don't go spouting any nonsense to him. I know that you're actually a very measured person in spite of how you may come across at times, but you have to remember that this is Skeleton Shoal, not our downtrodden mountain." Cui Dongshan nodded in response as he cast a disappointed gaze toward Wood Garment Mountain. With all these restrictions in place, this was going to be a rather boring stay. It was quite a smooth trip to the entrance of Wood Garment Mountain. Chen Pingan was familiar with most of the cultivators of the Flax Robe sect, and he received a warm welcome from many of them. Zhu Quan wasn't on the mountain. She had already gone to Green Cottage Town. However, Du Wenxi had already returned to the ancestral hall, and had gone into seclusion in preparation for a breakthrough. His chances of reaching the nascent tier were extremely high. At the mention of Du Wenxi, an amused grin appeared on Cui Dongshan's face as he said, "That kid is a bit of a hopeless romantic." Apparently, Huang Ting of Peace and Tranquility Mountain once paid a visit to malicious Ghost Valley, and she did so specifically to see Du Wenxi, but she didn't want him to misunderstand her intentions, so she told him that she would never marry in this lifetime. Du Wenxi was heartbroken, but at the same time he felt a little glad. Even though he couldn't have the woman of his dreams at the very least, he wouldn't have to worry about her marrying some other man. After some thought, he decided that the problem lay in his cultivation base. He felt like he would at least have some chances with Huang Ting if he reached a sufficiently lofty cultivation base. For example, perhaps he could pay a visit to Peace and Tranquility Mountain someday, and even better, maybe he could go on a journey together with Huang Ting. "It sounds like you know quite a lot, even though you didn't stay on Wood Garment Mountain for all that long either," Chen Pingan said with a chuckle. "I had nothing else to do, so I wandered around for fun," Cui Dongshan replied with a nod. The people of the cultivation world are not so different from their mortal world counterparts. Everyone likes to gossip about relationships, and the funny thing is that some of the young female cultivators who have feelings for Du Wenxi feel even more distraught than him on his behalf. All of them are bad-mouthing Huang Ting for rejecting Du Wenxi, saying that she has nothing to be proud of aside from a lofty cultivation base, good looks, a powerful background. Just like most of the mountains that served as the home of immortal ancestral halls, there was a staircase leading straight up Wood Garment Mountain. However, direct disciples were often permitted to fly their way up the mountain, and there were some mountains where flight restrictions didn't exist even for ordinary disciples. Having said that, there was still a hierarchy system in place, where the more prominent figures of the sect customarily flew higher and took different routes than their lower-ranked counterparts. There was no such system in place in the Dragon Spring Prefecture, firstly because it had only come into existence fairly recently, and there weren't many people in the Dragon Spring Sword sect and on Downtrodden Mountain, so such formalities weren't really observed. In contrast, there were many rules and restrictions in well-established immortal powers like the Flax Robe sect and the Spring Dew Garden, and this was a good thing in Chen Pingan's eyes. However, just because rules existed didn't mean that everyone stuck to the straight and narrow. The reason why there was so much internal conflict in the Spring Dew Garden was that the rules put into place didn't truly resonate with everyone. The Flax Robe sect had Chen Pingan's earnest admiration in this regard. Everyone in the sect, from Zhu Quan to Du Wenxi to Peng Lanqi, had different personalities, but they all possessed the same mindset and disposition, one that placed the sect above their own lives. The ultimate pursuit for cultivators was immortality, yet all of the cultivators of the Flax Robe sect were willing to lay down their lives for their sect. In times of crisis, all of the previous sect leaders who had come before Zhu Quan had always charged headfirst into battle, and were willing to die before anyone else just to set an example. The disciplinary elder of the Flax Robe sect drifted down the steps as he descended before Chen Pingan and Cui Dongshan, then smiled as he greeted, "Welcome, young Master Chen, fellow cultivator Cui." Chen Pingan noticed something rather interesting, which was that this disciplinary elder of the Flax Robe sect seemed to have been very fond of Cui Dongshan, and he spoke to the latter as if he were greeting an old friend. Could it be that Cui Dongshan had done more than just wander around aimlessly and eavesdrop on gossip on Wood Garment Mountain? Otherwise, even though he had directly challenged Skeleton Wall City, surely that alone wouldn't have been enough to earn him so much respect from the disciplinary elder. All Flax Robe sect cultivators were battle-hardened veterans, and even for someone who appeared as mild and gentlemanly as Du Wenxi, he had also fought in countless battles in malicious Ghost Valley. The disciplinary elder personally led the duo to the courtyard where Chen Pingan had previously stayed. It would still take around 10 more days for the Flax Robe sect intercontinental ship that traveled between Skeleton Shoal and Old Dragon City to return to the northern complete Reed continent from its previous stop at Oxhorn Mountain. Peng Lanqi and his great-grandfather, Peng Shanliang, were already waiting by the entrance of the courtyard. "Mr. Chen," Peng Lanqi called out with a wide smile as he waved at Chen Pingan. Upon his arrival, Chen Pingan immediately received a piece of good news from Peng Lanqi, who quietly informed him that he had secured 2 more sets of Divine Maiden mural replicas from his great-grandfather. "What about the price?" Chen Pingan asked in a hushed voice. "You'll get them for the market price," Peng Lanqi replied with a smile. "No, I'm just kidding. You'll get them for free. Looks like Immortal Peng really does adore you," Chen Pingan said with a smile. "Having said that, let's go with the market price. Friendship and business should never mix, and it's best to set clear boundaries between the two." Peng Lanqi was a little disappointed to hear this. "We've only been separated for such a short time, yet you've already grown so distant." Chen Pingan lowered his voice as he said, "Courtesies don't cost anything. You extend me a courtesy first, then I return the favor, and from there onward, neither of us has to extend any further courtesies to one another." Peng Lanqi's disappointed expression was instantly replaced with a wide grin. He was constantly learning new things about all manner of different subjects from Chen Pingan. The 3 men sat down, while Peng Lanqi remained standing behind his great-grandfather as a gesture of respect. Chen Pingan cut straight to the chase, bringing up the subject of the Spring Dew Garden. The disciplinary elder's name was Yen Su, and he immediately sent a flying sword letter to another one of the sect's nascent tier cultivators, a man by the name of Wei Yusong. He was technically a generation below Yansu, but he was up there in age. He was a senior brother to Pang Lanxi, and he was responsible for overseeing the sect's finances, playing a similar role to Gao Song of the Spring Dew Garden. He was a short and thin old man, and he was very polite and well-mannered to Chen Pingan and Cui Dongshan. After Zhu Quan successfully made that small deal with the Oxhorn Mountain ferry station of Downtrodden Mountain, the first thing that she did was to go and have a chat with Wei Yusong. On the surface, it seemed like she was asking about Wei Yusong's cultivation as the sect leader, but in reality, she had gone to seek praise. After seeing through her intentions, Wei Yusong had been struck by a combination of amusement and exasperation, and he refused to give her even a single word of praise, much to her frustration and disappointment. When it came to Chen Pingan, all Wei Yusong could say was that he had a positive first impression of the young man. However, he had nothing but the utmost respect and reverence for Cui Dongshan, and the reason for this was very simple. After Cui Dongshan arrived on Wood Garment Mountain, he wandered all over the mountain for 2 days, then went straight to the Flax Robe Sect Ancestral Hall and dropped off a huge stack of blueprints. In a very blunt and straightforward fashion, he pointed out the flaws of the Wood Garment Mountain Protection Formation, proclaiming that the formation was wasting the combat prowess of that group of heroic spirits. Based on his advice, the Wood Garment Mountain Ancestral Hall tasked an old guest elder, who was a Mahist mechanist, to carry out alterations to the formation in accordance with Cui Dongshan's blueprints. The entire project only cost just over 1,000 grain rain coins, yet it was enough to increase the power of the formation by around 20%. The Mahist mechanist in question was extremely embarrassed and guilt-ridden over his own incompetence, so much so that he almost quit his role as a guest elder after making the alterations to the formation. This had been a monumental breakthrough for the entire sect. Even an expenditure of 10,000 grain rain coins for only a 10% enhancement would have been worthy of wild celebrations for the entire Ancestral Hall, let alone a 20% enhancement for a tenth of that price. Hence, all of the cultivators of the Flax Robe Sect's Ancestral Hall had become extremely fond of Cui Dongshan, particularly for the fact that he hadn't asked for any monetary compensation. Instead, after dropping off the stack of blueprints and laying out some important points to take note of, he had departed without so much as a backward glance, resuming his aimless wandering all over Wood Garment Mountain. After the event, Zhu Quan approached Cui Dongshan to ask him how the Flax Robe Sect could repay him. She told him that as long as he stated a price, the Flax Robe Sect would be sure to satisfy him, even if they had to sell off assets and borrow money. Cui Dongshan didn't pass up on this opportunity. He demanded that Du Wenxi and Pang Lanxi had to become guest elders of Downtrodden Mountain after they reached the nascent tier. However, their guest elder status would only be an unofficial one, so Downtrodden Mountain wouldn't make them do anything, unless they wanted to, of course. At the time, Zhu Quan had been quite taken aback by how little compensation Cui Dongshan had asked for. A guilt-ridden look had appeared on her face as she sighed. It was truly wrong of Chen Pingan not to have mentioned you to me at all. What a heartless bastard. I'll be sure to give him a piece of my mind next time he comes to Skeleton Shoal. Tears instantly welled up in Cui Dongshan's eyes as he accused in a pitiable manner. Did you really have to bring that up again? I think you're the heartless one, big sister Zhu. Chen Pingan should be proud to have a student like you, Zhu Quan praised. Likewise, my teacher should be just as proud to have a friend like you, Cui Dongshan replied. It's a complete travesty that a fine woman like you still doesn't have a doubt partner. The two of them almost got into a fight after this exchange of backhanded insults, and Zhu Quan was still furious even as she traveled to Green Cottage Town. Wei Yusong was a very shrewd and experienced businessman. Otherwise, with an unreliable sect leader like Zhu Quan and a bunch of just as unreliable elders like Yan Su, the Flax Robe Sect would have been slowly whittled down by Skeleton Wall City until there was nothing left. Whenever Wei Yusong went to attend meetings in the Ancestral Hall, he was always very stern and harsh, even to Zhu Quan and Yan Su, the latter of whom was his master. Furthermore, he always liked to bring his account books with him, flipping through the pages one by one while making barbed remarks at everyone. Over time, his seniors in the Ancestral Hall grew accustomed to his scathing words, and they merely pretended not to be able to hear him. Wei Yusong was naturally not opposed to the idea of helping the Spring Dew Garden transport its goods to the Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, but some thought had to be put into the revenue share model. As Wei Yusong pulled out his account books again, Yen Su and Pang Shanling began habitually tuning out what he was about to say next. Cui Dongshan didn't see it fit to inject himself into the conversation, so he began making faces at Pang Lanshi, who was very apprehensive of him. He was still a young boy, and he was worried that his beloved childhood friend would develop feelings for someone as absurdly handsome as Cui Dongshan. His concerns were further compounded when, during his last visit to her shop, she casually brought up Cui Dongshan in their conversation. Granted, all she said was that Cui Dongshan had a rather strange personality, but the fact that she had mentioned her at all was enough to make Pang Lanshi feel very uneasy. Thus, he had been deeply concerned of late, and he really wanted to tell Chen Pingan about his woes. As Chen Pingan began bartering with Wei Yusong, he discovered, much to his exasperation, that the latter was ridiculously stingy. In the pursuit of greater profits, it seemed that he didn't care at all about his dignity as an elder of such a powerful sect. Whenever he encountered any opposition from Chen Pingan in the negotiations, Wei Yusong would immediately bring up another one of the ancestral hall's old ancestors, who was currently away from the sect. He proclaimed that this old ancestor was extremely pedantic and strict when it came to the finances of the sect, micromanaging everything down to the very last snowflake coin. Apparently, anyone who was even suspected of doing anything that harmed the interests of the sect would be subjected to a brutal dressing down from this old ancestor. Wei Yusong also painted himself in a very pitiful light, claiming that he was nothing more than a punching bag of the Flax Robe sect ancestral hall. Everyone was constantly demanding money from him, and if he refused to comply, then they would pressure him with their superior cultivation base or seniority until he was forced to cave to their demands. If one were to believe Wei Yusong, then it felt like he may as well have been a doormat in the Flax Robe sect, one that everyone in the sect could trample all over without any regard for consequences. Powerless to do anything, Chen Pingan could only set down his teacup before clearing his throat. Cui Dongshan was on the verge of dozing off into a nap, but he immediately sat bolt upright as he declared, "There are actually still some more improvements that could be made to the mountain protection formation." This seemed to have been precisely what Wei Yusong had been waiting to hear, and he immediately slammed a hand down onto the table as he declared, "We'll do exactly as you say, young Master Chan. I hope this isn't going to make things difficult for you in the Flax Robe sect," Chen Pingan said in an earnest manner. A proud look appeared on Wei Yusong's face as he scoffed. "Nonsense. When it comes to the finances of the Flax Robe sect, no one can tell me what to do. Not even the gods, let alone sect leader Zhu." Chen Pingan feigned a look of realization as he smiled and nodded, while Wei Yusong's smile remained unchanged. Wei Yusong, Yen Su, and Pang Shanling departed together. Wei Yusong insisted on catching up with Cui Dongshan, so the latter could only go with him. That left only Chen Pingan and Pang Lanshi, the latter of whom sat down as he asked in a quiet voice, "Is Senior Cui really your student, Mr. Chan?" Chen Pingan nodded as he replied, "It's very normal for you to be skeptical." Pang Lanshi wanted to say something, but was rather hesitant. "If you have something to ask of me, but find it difficult to begin, then—" Chen Pingan's voice trailed off here as he raised his hands and made a gesture. Pang Lanshi immediately understood what he was referring to, and he quickly departed from the courtyard, then returned shortly thereafter before setting a pair of wooden boxes down onto the table. Additionally, there was also a letter from Cloudtop City. Pang Lanshi was the recipient, and it was to be passed on to Chen Haoran. Chen Pingan tucked the letter up his sleeve then smiled as he asked, "Isn't that better? Don't you have much more confidence to state your request now?" "I'm a little worried, Mr. Chen," Pang Lanshi admitted in a quiet voice. Chen Pingan immediately realized the cause for Pang Lanshi's concern. He was an extremely talented young boy, who didn't have to worry about his cultivation. The other potential cause for concern for him was the survival of the Flax Robe sect, but there was no ongoing crisis that currently threatened the sect's existence. Actually, it was more accurate to say that the sect was constantly under threat of destruction, so all of its cultivators had already grown accustomed to its perpetual state of peril. In that case, that left only one other possible cause for concern. "Tell me what's gotten you so worried, and I'll help you analyze the situation," Chen Pingan encouraged with a smile. Pang Lanshi told Chen Pingan what had him feeling so worried, and it really wasn't anything significant, but for a boy his age it felt like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. Chen Pingan had to suppress his amusement as he put on a thoughtful expression and said, "There's no need for you to worry. The girl that you like definitely won't abandon you for Cui Dongshan. And Cui Dongshan definitely won't fall in love with someone like her, either." Peng Lanqi was furious to hear this. "How could you say that, Mr. Chen? What do you mean by someone like her? You make it sound like she's unworthy of him or something. Since when had Mr. Chen become so callous? He wasn't like this in the past." Chen Pingan was unable to suppress an amused smile, while Peng Lanqi scratched his head in embarrassment at his incensed outburst. With that, his concerns had completely evaporated, and at the same time, a sense of newfound conviction had arisen in his heart. He was determined to work even harder in his cultivation and show her that she was right for choosing him, that this was a decision that she would never come to regret. "That girl doesn't like you because you're a cultivation prodigy," Chen Pingan said. "However, if you can prove that you really are every bit the prodigy that you've been made out to be, then she'll be even happier, both for you and for herself." "Really?" Peng Lanqi asked in a vulnerable voice. "Really?" Chen Pingan confirmed with a nod. "This is something that I'm absolutely certain of." Peng Lanqi sprawled down onto the table in an absent-minded manner, while Chen Pingan opened one of the wooden boxes and pulled out a divine maiden mural replica before spreading it out onto the table. He carefully examined the portrait, and it truly was one of Pang Shanling's finest works. "There must be many girls who like you, right, Mr. Chen?" Peng Lanqi suddenly asked. "Not at all," Chen Pingan denied with a shake of his head as he carefully placed the portrait back into the box. "I don't believe you," Peng Lanqi said with an unconvinced shake of his head. Chen Pingan opened the letter from Su Xingjiu, which was very concise, informing Chen Pingan of Cloudtop City's current situation. He also declared in his letter that he was ready to set off again, and that he would visit the Great Emblem Sword sect a second time after Lu Jinglong had fought his 3 challengers. This time it would be a long journey going all the way up to the Great Emblem Sword sect in the north and down to Skeleton Shoal in the south. After reading through the letter, Chen Pingan said, "The one who wrote this letter is a friend of mine. His name is Su Xingjiu and he comes from Cloudtop City. He may come to visit Wood Garment Mountain in the future. If you have some spare time when he comes to visit, you can perhaps meet him, but if you're busy, then there's no need to go out of your way to see him, and I'm serious when I say that. Just because he's my friend doesn't necessarily mean that he'll become your friend, so there's no need to try and force anything." Peng Lanqi nodded as he replied, "All right, I'll send a letter to Cloudtop City later to arrange a time for us to meet. As for whether we'll become friends or not, I'll see when the time comes." At the same time, he was thinking to himself that any friend of Mr. Chen's was surely at least worth meeting. Even though Peng Lanqi had no involvement in the administrative affairs of the Flax Robe sect, there were only so few cultivators in the entire sect, so he had come to learn some things nevertheless. He knew that the Flax Robe sect didn't necessarily despise the Spring Dew Garden, but they definitely weren't on friendly terms either. All of their dealings were strictly for business purposes. The Spring Dew Garden was a little too money-driven, and that was not a trait that cultivators of the Flax Robe sect were very fond of. Hence, over the years, the Spring Dew Garden had constantly been trying to appease Wei Yusong, but they didn't dare to go overboard in their approach. Furthermore, Song Lanxiao, who was in charge of the Spring Dew Garden Immortal ship, could barely even get a word in with Wei Yusong. After all, Wei Yusong possessed a very lofty status in the Flax Robe sect, and he was also renowned for his stern, no-nonsense personality. However, Peng Lanqi noticed that as soon as Chen Pingan proposed an intercontinental collaborative business partnership between Downtrodden Mountain, the Spring Dew Garden, and the Flax Robe sect, Wei Yusong had been receptive to the idea. Peng Lanqi was almost certain that Wei Yusong would have instantly turned down the idea had it been proposed by just about anyone else. Peng Lanqi felt like this was also an area in which he had much to learn from Mr. Chen. Interacting with others and the world around oneself was a very important skill, and one that wasn't so easy to master. Did you know that the more concern you displayed over Cui Dongshan, the more pleased the girl you like felt? Chen Pingan asked. That's why she seems more cheerful whenever she brings up Cui Dongshan. You have to realize that the mention of Cui Dongshan isn't what's putting her in a good mood. Instead, it's the anxiety that she could sense from you. A look of enlightenment instantly appeared on Peng Lanqi's face, followed by a vibrant smile. What are you still doing here? This is the perfect time to go and see her. Chen Pingan urged. You always have such invaluable advice for me, Mr. Chen. I should have asked for an extra set of mural replicas from my great-grandfather for you, Peng Lanqi said as he rose to his feet, then promptly departed. Chen Pingan was left to sit in the courtyard on his own, and some time later Cui Dongshan returned, only to see a brick placed on the table in front of his teacher. A sense of panic instantly rose up in his heart, and he immediately stopped cold in his tracks as he hurriedly said, I had no idea that Pei Qian had taken up martial arts teacher. Zhu Lian Zhengdafeng and Wei Bo were the ones who kept this a secret from you. It has nothing to do with me. I swear. I never intended to blame you, Chen Pingan scoffed with a roll of his eyes. I know who are the ones that are at fault here. A wide smile immediately appeared on Cui Dongshan's face as he offered, I'd be glad to help if you want to teach those three a lesson. Chen Pingan ignored Cui Dongshan's offer as he pointed at the brick from the Taoist temple, which still retained some of its water fortune and Tao intent, and said, I've gathered a total of 36 of these bricks. I'm planning to pave them onto the ground on Downtrodden Mountain for 6 people to practice their fist techniques, namely me, Pei Qian Zhu Lian, Zhang Dafeng, Lu Baixiang and Xin Yuanji. Cui Dongshan was instantly distraught, pointing at himself as he wailed in despair. What about me, teacher? I'm your most prized disciple. Fine, you can have my share. Chen Pingan sighed in an exasperated manner. A wide grin instantly appeared on Cui Dongshan's face as he said, My tears of sorrow have just turned into tears of joy. Thank you, teacher. Chen Pingan glanced at him out of the corner of his eye, and he immediately sat down in an obedient manner. Chen Pingan slid the brick across the table toward Cui Dongshan as he said, I had an idea just now. You're by far a better calligrapher than I am. So I want you to engrave some auspicious messages onto the underside of these bricks. Once we return to Downtrodden Mountain, we'll plant the bricks down in secret when no one else is around. Perhaps someday someone will stumble upon these messages, and it'll be a pleasant surprise for them. It's not that important, I just think it'll be fun. Cui Dongshan nodded obediently as he sat on his stone stool with his legs crossed, then leaned forward to rest against the table. He pressed both hands down onto the brick as he said, We have to think carefully about what messages we want to inscribe, teacher. We have to make the messages meaningful and astounding. How about we inscribe a message, each for everyone on Downtrodden Mountain? Chen Pingan suggested. As for the rest, you can just use whatever phrases you like from different sagely scriptures. What a brilliant idea! Cui Dongshan exclaimed in an ecstatic manner. I'm now fully convinced that you're the one responsible for turning everyone on Downtrodden Mountain into insincere suck-ups. Chen Pingan scoffed with a roll of his eyes. It wasn't me. I swear. Cui Dongshan yelled as he raised both hands in surrender. It was only after Chen Pingan and Cui Dongshan had boarded the Flax Robe Sect's intercontinental ship did they truly begin their journey to return home. While taking a break from his cultivation and fist technique practice, Chen Pingan went to Cui Dongshan's cabin, which neighbored his own, to ask him a question. The Confucian sages are such incredibly wise and learned individuals, so why don't they go into more detail in their teachings about topics like mental cultivation, learning, and doing good deeds? Also, why are the teachings so diverse and chaotic? It feels like everyone is saying their own thing, and while that may be good for discourse, it almost feels like everyone's arguing with one another. In response to this question, Cui Dongshan put on a rare display, giving a serious answer for once as he asked, You feel like many people's teachings are too convoluted and vague, thereby confusing the masses, right? Chen Pingan considered the question momentarily, then nodded in response. Cui Dongshan shook his head as he countered, Some teachings and principles should be lofty and vague. They are the reason why humans are different from all other living beings. Of course, there must be practical and actionable principles that can be easily espoused and understood, but it would not be a good thing if there weren't lofty principles that encouraged people to explore deeper concepts and the world around them. Chen Pingan was silent for a long while before finally nodding as he said, That's valid. Let's go back to your original question now, Cui Dongshan began. However, Chen Pingan raised a hand to interrupt him as he said, It's fine, I'll think about it on my own for now to see if I can think of the answer for myself. How about we play a game of Go? Your Go skills are far superior to my own teacher, Cui Dongshan flattered. I would be utterly embarrassed to display my lackluster skills in your presence. Despite his humble words, he had eagerly brought out a Go board and a pair of Go stone jars. I want you to speak as little as possible on Downtrodden Mountain from now on, Chen Pingan ordered with a stern expression. If the teacher does not speak, then the disciple certainly wouldn't dare to utter a word, Chen Pingan said with a smile as he picked up a stone and held it aloft. Chen Pingan also picked up a Go stone. As soon as Cui Dongshan sat down in front of the Go board, his entire aura and disposition instantly changed and he proposed, "May I be so bold as to give you a handicap of 12 stones, teacher?" Chen Pingan took a glance at the serious and focused Cui Dongshan, then silently put his Go stone back into the jar before departing without a word. The Flax-Robe Sect intercontinental ship was dragged along by an armor of heroic spirit laborers, racing above the sea of clouds. The ship began to slow as it approached the Oxhorn Mountain ferry station before finally drawing to a halt. As Chen Pingan and Cui Dongshan disembarked from the ship, they were greeted by the waiting Wei Bo. At the moment, Zhu Lian was situated in Old Dragon City, while Zhang Dafeng claimed that he had rolled his ankle, an injury that would keep him bedridden for months, so he had requested that Sun Yuanji take his place as gatekeeper. "Please send us to the foot of Downtrodden Mountain," Chen Pingan requested with a smile. Wei Bo gave a relieved nod, and the three of them instantly vanished before appearing at the entrance of the mountain. Upon spotting the trio, Sun Yuanji was just about to stand up, but the three of them had already begun scaling the mountain. Chen Pingan gave her a nod of acknowledgement, then gestured for her to remain seated and continue with her cultivation. Sun Yuanji wasn't good at making small talk, and her impression of Chen Pingan was also rather lackluster, so she remained seated and closed her eyes as she continued to circulate her true qi throughout her body. "I'm assuming you already know everything?" Wei Bo asked. Chen Pingan nodded in response. Cui Chang had left behind a posthumous note in the bamboo building on Downtrodden Mountain, not on the second floor, but on the desk on the first floor, and the envelope read, "To be opened by Nuanshu." According to Cui Chang's final wishes, he didn't want to be buried. Instead, he wanted his own ashes to be scattered anywhere in the lotus root-blessed land without delay. Furthermore, everyone was instructed to disregard any demands made by the ancestral hall of the Cui clan. The note explicitly stated that if anyone from the Cui clan's ancestral hall dared to set foot on Downtrodden Mountain, then they would be driven away by force. Pei Qian has chosen to stay in the lotus root-blessed land this entire time, and she told us to inform her when you come back, Wei Bo explained. Zhou Mili also went to the lotus root-blessed land to keep Pei Qian company. Chen Lingjun has left Downtrodden Mountain to help Shiro look after the pastry shop on Dragon Riding Alley, so the only one left on Downtrodden Mountain right now is Chan Rushu, but she's most likely out doing some shopping at the prefectural city right now. Outside of her, there are only Lu Baixiang's two disciples, Yuan Bao and Yuan Lai. "Congratulations on your breakthrough," Chen Pingan said. A self-deprecating look appeared on Wei Bo's face as he said, "The imperial court of the Great Li Empire is beginning to make some moves, all of which have grandiose justifications attached to them. Even I can't help but agree with their reasoning. You were a little too heavy-handed in your handling of Jin Qing," Chen Pingan said with a smile. "Even if the emperor of the Great Li Empire knows that you don't have any ill intentions, the fact that two of the great mountain gods have become so closely associated with each other is still going to be a slight cause for concern." "I had to intervene," Wei Bo said. "Jin Qing is the only one that I somewhat like the look of. If any mountain god takes over the central mountain, then life will only become more difficult for our northern mountain. Throughout history, all of the 5 great mountain gods of any nation or empire have always been forced to go against one another, thereby forming a tense and tenuous balance. As opposed to going with the flow, I may as well be a little more shameless. In any case at this point, the emperor has no choice but to accept what's happening. Jin Qing is even more shameless than I am. He's been constantly praising me and my cloud-draped mountain to the emperor." Upon reaching the bamboo building, Chen Pingan sighed. "I didn't think I would be returning to the southern garden nation so soon. I already went there, so I'll stay behind," Cui Dongshan suddenly said. Wei Bo pulled out the parasol leaf umbrella that had been temporarily placed in his possession, then opened it as he said, The Lotus Root Blessed Land has only recently been elevated into a mid-grade blessed land, so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to make frequent visits. I'll send you to the capital of the Southern Garden Nation instead. Thank you, Chen Pingan said with a smile and a nod, then instantly vanished from the spot. Weibo heaved a faint sigh, while Cui Dongshan was already on the walkway of the second floor, resting on the railing as he stared off into the distance. Weibo closed the parasol leaf umbrella before sitting down at the stone table. You don't have to be concerned, Weibo, Cui Dongshan suddenly said. I'm not concerned, Weibo denied with a shake of his head. When will you be leaving Downtrodden Mountain? Cui Dongshan thought about it for a moment, then replied, I'll leave soon after teacher and Pei Qian return. I've already racked up a ton of debt. That old bastard loves holding grudges. There was not much to talk about between the two, so the conversation quickly petered out into silence. Is Senior Cui that concerned for Chen Pingan? Weibo asked. Not only did he intentionally avoid seeing Chen Pingan one final time, but he even asked for his ashes to be spread in the Lotus Root Blessed Land without display instead of returning to Downtrodden Mountain for a proper burial. My grandfather had extremely high hopes for teacher, so he wanted teacher to miss him as little as possible, Cui Dongshan explained. That way, the memory of my grandfather won't tarnish the purity of his fists. On a familiar street in the capital of the Southern Garden Nation, Chen Pingan slowly made his way into a small alley with his bamboo bookcase on his back and his hiking pole in his hand. He stopped at the entrance of a small courtyard, then took a brief glance at the couplets before knocking on the gate. Pei Qian was the one to open the door, while Zhou Mili was seated on a little stool, carrying a bamboo hiking pole. Pei Qian's face instantly puckered up as she struggled to hold back her tears. Chen Pingan patted her on the head as he said, I know what happened. Don't overthink things. Just know that you did nothing wrong. Pei Qian's hands balled up into tight fists, and she began trembling as she lowered her head. Chen Pingan gave the top of her head a gentle rub as he asked, Why are you holding back your tears when you're so sad? Are you no longer my disciple just because you began practicing martial arts? Chen Pingan crouched down, and Pei Qian threw her arms around him as she burst into tears, her strangled sobs much more painful and heart-wrenching than if she had simply begun bawling her eyes out. Zhou Mili also began to weep. Only after Pei Qian's tears had completely run dry did Chen Pingan pat her on the head before standing up again. He removed the bamboo bookcase from his back, and Pei Qian wiped the remaining tears from her face before hurriedly taking the bamboo bookcase, while Zhou Mili rushed over to take his hiking pole. Chen Pingan looked around to discover that the courtyard was still exactly as he remembered it, as if it had been frozen in time. Zhou Mili was holding onto 2 hiking poles as she nudged her bamboo chair toward Chen Pingan. You seem to have grown a little taller, Chen Pingan remarked as he patted Zhou Mili on the head as well. After sitting down on the bamboo chair, he was silent for a long while before smiling as he declared, We'll go back to Downtrodden Mountain together after I've met with Chao Qinglang, Mr. Zhong, and some other people. Pei Qian's eyes were swollen and bloodshot as she sat down beside Chen Pingan and gently tugged on his sleeve. Do you want to tell me about your journey with Senior Cui? Chen Pingan asked in a gentle voice. Pei Qian nodded in response, then began meticulously recounting her journey, and she spoke for a very long time. Chen Pingan listened carefully the entire time. Before long, Chao Qinglang returned, and he gently called out, Mr. Chen. Chen Pingan grabbed onto Pei Qian's hand, and the two of them stood up together as he smiled and said, I can tell just from looking at you that you've become a fine scholar, Qinglang. Chen Pingan extended a scholarly salute. Sure enough, he really had become a scholar. Pei Qian got up onto the tips of her toes, and Chen Pingan leaned down to allow her to whisper into his ear. Master, Chao Qinglang became a cultivator in secret. Doesn't that mean he hasn't been focusing on his studies? His couplets are way worse than yours, right? Chen Pingan immediately replied with a knuckle to her forehead. Tears began to well up in Pei Qian's eyes again, while Zhou Mili clutched the pair of hiking poles to her chest in a nervous manner. Chen Pingan had never beaten her before, so it came as quite a shock to see how unforgiving he was with Pei Qian. Zhou Mili furrowed her brows tightly as she cocked her head to the side, straining her little brain with all her might. Could it be that he picked up Pei Qian from the side of some street? Could it be that she actually wasn't a princess who got lost in the world of commoners? Chen Pingan gently rubbed Pei Qian's sore forehead with his thumb, then gestured for Chao Qinglang to sit down with them. Chao Qinglang carried over a small stool and sat down beside Chen Pingan, while Pei Qian sat down in between them on a little bamboo chair. Zhou Mili remained standing behind Pei Qian. "Have you been well, Qinglang?" Chen Pingan asked. "I've been doing great," Chao Qinglang replied with a smile and a nod. "Mr. Zhong is my teacher at school, and after Mr. Lu came to our southern garden nation, he sought me out very often and gave me many books. Take me to see Mr. Zhong after this," Chen Pingan requested. "I have some things to discuss with him." Chao Qinglang nodded in response. "Actually, it's fine," Chen Pingan said with a smile. "Mr. Zhong is already on the way here. He'll arrive very soon, so all we have to do is wait for him." He then turned to Pei Qian as he asked, "Have you been slacking off with your daily transcriptions?" Pei Qian shook her head. "Show me," Chen Pingan instructed as he extended a hand. Pei Qian immediately rushed into the room and brought out a large stack of papers. Chen Pingan meticulously leafed through the papers one by one, then returned them to Pei Qian as he nodded and said, "Looks like you really haven't been slacking off." Pei Qian flashed him a wide grin, and he helped her wipe the tears from her face. "You guys stay here for now, I have to go talk to Mr. Zhong about some things," Chen Pingan said before standing up from his chair. After Chen Pingan departed, Pei Qian returned the stack of papers to her room, then sat down on her small bamboo chair as she rested her chin on her hands. Chen Pingan ran into Zhong Qiu right as he rounded the corner. Much of the hair in Zhong Qiu's sideburns had turned white since their previous meeting. The two of them made their way down the street where they had once both fought against and alongside each other, and it felt like a walk down memory lane. With regard to the current state of the Lotus Root Blessed Land, Zhu Lian had written about it in his letters, and both Li Lu and Cui Dongshan had also spoken at length on the subject, so Chen Pingan was already very familiar with everything. The territories of the Southern Garden Nation, the Pine Song Nation, the Northern Jian Nation, and the border grasslands didn't appear to have changed, but their inhabitants had already undergone drastic changes. Out of those 4 places, only the Southern Garden Nation, which had been assigned to Chen Pingan, was still home to residents with their souls intact. Aside from the nation's human inhabitants, all of the other living entities and landmarks hadn't faded, either, so they hadn't been reduced to the same state as the people of the White Paper Blessed Land. According to Li Lu, all of the living entities in the other 3 places had already lost the essence of their being. This was why Zhu Lian had referred to those places as 3 blank picture scrolls. However, the likes of Lu Tai, Yu Zhani, and the young boy from that educated clan in the capital of the Southern Garden Nation had all vanished from this blessed land. Elsewhere in the blessed land, Imperial Preceptor Zhong Qiu would also vanish into thin air. They were among the very few people who had caught the eye of the observing Dao Temple's abbot. This was a complete overhaul of an entire small world, something that required unimaginable mystical abilities to accomplish. His Majesty has already decided to pursue the path of cultivation, but prior to leaving the Lotus Root Blessed Land, he wants to see the Southern Garden Nation conquer the entire world, Zhong Qiu declared, not wasting any time with small talk. "How do you feel about this, Mr. Zhong?" Chen Pingan asked. Chen Pingan had met the Emperor of the Southern Garden Nation once in a nearby restaurant. Outside of Chen Pingan himself, there had been 6 other people in attendance, one of whom was Huang Ting. From Fan Wanner and Tong Qingqing of the past, all it had taken was a glance in the mirror for her to transform into Huang Ting of Peace and Tranquility Mountain, a cultivator who possessed such immense aptitude and fortune that even He Xiaoyang was her junior. Huang Ting had once engaged Qi Jinglong in a battle of life and death on Temper Mountain, and in the end, she had been defeated by a thin margin. Chen Pingan didn't get a chance to meet her during his journey across the northern complete reed continent, but according to Qi Jinglong, the two of them had been evenly matched. Near the end of their battle, they were no longer interested in taking each other's lives. Apparently, the only reason that Huang Ting had lost was that she wanted to maintain her dignity as a woman by ensuring that her Dao robe remained completely intact, and that slight distraction ultimately proved to be a downfall, allowing Qi Jinglong to get up from the summit of Temper Mountain just a little earlier than she did. At the time, the Emperor Wei Liang had been in his prime, and he had been accompanied by the Empress Zhou Shuzhen, the eldest prince Wei Yan, the ambitious yet ultimately unsuccessful second prince Wei Yun, and the youngest princess Wei Zhen. Chen Pingan had an exceptional memory, and he could clearly recall not just everyone's appearance, demeanor, and the words they had spoken, but also even what wine they had drunk and what dishes they had eaten. The old monk from the Heart Manifestation Temple, not far away from the small alley, the local delicacies sold in the White River Temple night market, the scripture library in that official's residence, and the story of the impoverished scholar from Champion Scholar Alley and the Peepa woman. All of these memories remained clear as day in his heart. Zhong Qiu was silent for a moment, then replied in a dejected manner, "I feel a little disillusioned." He had worked tirelessly to strengthen the Southern Garden nation with the ultimate goal of conquering what he had previously thought was the entire world, but now that he had come to realize how laughably wrong he had been, he was feeling a little weary and lost. He would even wonder to himself if he had perhaps truly been wrong, and that perhaps Eugenie had been right. From this point onward, countless cultivators, spirits, mountain and river deities, and all manners of other unprecedented beings will begin to appear in this world, Chen Pingan said. You shouldn't be feeling disheartened, Mr. Zhong. Even though I am technically the owner of this lotus root-blessed land, I won't impose my own will upon this place. The lotus root-blessed land was never my backyard, somewhere that I can curate as I see fit, and I fully intend for it to remain that way. If some of its residents are able to embark on the path of cultivation, then I'll simply leave them to cultivate and develop in peace. As for the mortal world, I do not plan to interfere there either. Whether it be peace or war, prosperity or destruction, everyone is free to do as they please. However, there must be rules in place when it comes to the appointment and regulation of mountain and river deities. Otherwise, the entire world will slowly descend into chaos, becoming a place where the boundaries between humans, ghosts, and deities become too blurred. Are you planning to use an entire world to observe the Great Tao? Zhong Qiu asked with a smile. Chen Pingan faltered slightly upon hearing this, then replied, I didn't think about it that way before, but now that you mention it, I suppose that does seem to be what I'm doing. What is the majestic world like? Zhong Qiu asked. Chen Pingan considered the question for a moment, then replied, the hearts of the people remain the same, but the majestic world is far more vast than the Southern Garden nation, and there is much to be explored and seen. Furthermore, there's not just one world. Instead, there are multiple worlds outside of the majestic world. You should go out there and take a look for yourself, Mr. Zhong. Better late than never. Before I came to see you, His Majesty had already abdicated the throne, and the eldest prince Wei Yan has taken his place, Zhong Qiu said. The second prince, Wei Yun, has already been detained by the former emperor for quite some time. I also recently resigned from my position as imperial preceptor, but I'm not going to leave right away. Instead, I plan to explore the entirety of this world first. Chen Pingan, I hope you can keep your promise and refrain from reducing the people of this world to your puppets and playthings. However, I'm not some inflexible pedant who refuses to welcome any form of change. As long as I agree with the rules that you put into place, then I'm happy to act within the boundaries of those rules. Even if it pains me to do so, I won't complain or make a fuss. I actually have an idea for how you can be put even more at ease, Chen Pingan said with a smile. You want me to become a guest elder? Zhong Qiu asked. Chen Pingan didn't deny this at all as he tucked his hands up their opposite sleeves and said, You are an extraordinary talent who excels simultaneously as an intellectual and a martial artist. It would be a travesty for me to pass up on you, so I have to at least give it a try. Don't you already have Zhu Lian at your side? Zhong Qiu asked with a smile. Among the few people that I admire the most, Zhu Lian, who played the role of savior, is one, and martial arts maniac Zhu Lian is another. When I met Zhu Lian in the flesh, it was such a bizarre feeling, as if I were reading a book, only for the character in the story to emerge from the pages. You just have to mark down your name in the ancestral hall of my downtrodden mountain, Mr. Zhong, Chen Pingan said. I won't restrict your freedom in any way, and you can go wherever you please. Downtrodden mountain? Zhong Qiu asked as he raised an eyebrow. Chen Pingan nodded in response. That's a fine name, Zhong Qiu praised. In that case, I'll take you up on your offer. After meeting with the former emperor of the Southern Garden nation, Chen Pingan bade farewell to Chao Qinglang, then departed from the lotus root-blessed land with Pei Qian and Zhou Mili. Upon their return to Downtrodden Mountain, Chen Pingan appeared largely unaffected by Cui Cheng's passing. He lived on the first floor of the bamboo building, continuing to cultivate and practice his fist techniques as usual, and only occasionally would he go up to the second floor, where he would stand in the walkway and stare off into the distance. One day, late at night, Pei Qian was sitting by herself on the top step. Cui Dongshan scaled the mountain to join her. Pei Qian stared intently at him for a while, then asked, "Are you not sad that Grandpa Cui is gone? You'll only be able to see my mental state if I let you," Cui Dongshan said with a smile. "If I want to hide it from you, then you'll never be able to see it." Pei Qian punched the palm of her hand in frustration as she grumbled, "I knew it. My cultivation is still lacking." Cui Dongshan shook his head as he said, "That's not it. I dare say I'm unmatched in this regard, unless you count in some of the old deities from the ancient past." Pei Qian nodded in understanding. She knew that the big white goose sitting beside her was actually very impressive in many regards. Cui Dongshan smiled as he continued, "A young boy who hasn't experienced the ups and downs of life will often bawl their eyes out at the passing of a senior. They wear their heart on their sleeve, and their grief is expressed abundantly clearly through their tears. However, the boy's father and other seniors will mostly be much more self-contained in their emotions, able to speak and interact normally with others at the funeral and even smile from time to time. Such is life. At different points in one's life, the type of grief that they experience is different. You don't understand right now because you haven't truly grown up yet." "I'll admit that I don't understand," Pei Qian conceded with a nod. "I may not be able to understand it in the future either, nor do I want to." She had never felt like the Southern Garden Nation was her home. Back when her parents passed away, she hadn't actually felt much grief. In her mind, they had simply crossed over to the other side slightly ahead of her, and she would quickly follow. Perhaps she would starve to death, perhaps she would freeze to death, perhaps someone would beat her to death. Even if she caught up to them in the afterlife, what good would that do her? She would still be despised and regarded as a hindrance. Hence, after leaving the lotus flower-blessed land, she couldn't even bring herself to pretend to be sad. However, Cui Cheng was different. He was the only other senior that she had truly been fond of outside of her master. He had tormented her extensively with his daily beatings, and in the beginning, when she still dared to threaten to quit martial arts altogether, the beatings would only become more severe. On top of that, he had said many harsh things to her that were even more hurtful than the beatings. However, Pei Qian now knew what was truly good for her, and she didn't even have to use her eyes to look into the hearts of others anymore. Cui Dongshan raised his head to look up at the night sky. The Mid-Autumn Festival was fast approaching, and the moon was bright and round. "This is why teacher never wanted you to grow up," Cui Dongshan said in a quiet voice. "At least not in a hurry. After you grow up, you'll begin to want to bear certain burdens. When that time comes, your master won't be able to stop you, nor will he try. Do you still remember when you and your master parted ways with Li Baoping back at the Great Sui Academy?" Pei Qian nodded vigorously as a smile appeared on her face, and she replied loudly, "Of course I do. I was really happy, and big sister Baoping was even happier." Cui Dongshan also smiled as he mused. Why is it that teacher gathered all of us to make it such a big occasion? It's because he knew that he would never be able to see the same little girl in the red coat again. The short and sprightly girl with the rosy cheeks, round eyes, and the tender voice, constantly and affectionately calling him her junior uncle with her bookcase on her back, the one that fits her just right. That little girl will only exist in his memories in their next meeting, and that is the sorrow of adults. They can store those precious memories away in the fondest recesses of their hearts. Cui Dongshan gently swept his sleeve through the air as his voice trailed off, as if he were trying to sweat away some sorrow. "These are supposed to be things that you only figure out on your own after you grow up, but I want to tell you about them so that at the very least you'll know what to expect. Teacher isn't any less heartbroken than I am about Grandpa's passing, but he'll never let others know just how grief-stricken he feels. Have you ever wondered why your master likes to collect useless objects like the brushes that he's used in the past, straw sandals that he previously wore, and worthless jars and vials? It's because ever since he was a child, he was accustomed to separation. He was constantly watching people depart to the afterlife, and he's desperate to cling on to any memory that he has of them, so he habitually keeps all of these seemingly useless trinkets. All of us will experience all types of separations, not just teacher, but for many people these feelings pass quite quickly. In contrast, Teacher is someone who is extremely sentimental, and he carefully bottles up these feelings without anyone else knowing. Then what should master do? Pei Qian asked with a sympathetic expression. Nothing, Cui Dongshan replied with a smile. He's already used to it. That's not good. Pei Qian yelled as she sprang to her feet. It's not right. Cui Dongshan remained silent as he leaned back to lie down, while Pei Qian rushed her way down the mountain to the bamboo building. There she discovered Chen Pingan seated at the stone table with 2 flagons of wine before him, but not a single sip had been taken from either of them. He was sitting bolt upright, while his hands were clenched into loose fists that were resting on his knees, and it was unclear what he was thinking. Master, you're not allowed to be sad, Pei Qian yelled. Chen Pingan turned to face her, then smiled as he replied, All right, I won't be sad. Pei Qian stared up at her master, just as her master had once stared up at Aoyang. Chen Pingan rose to his feet, then dragged over a pair of bamboo chairs before sitting down alongside Pei Qian. I'm going to be leaving again soon, Pei Qian, Chen Pingan declared in a quiet voice. Make sure to look after yourself. You have to look after yourself as well, master. Pei Qian replied with a nod. I don't mean to brag, but when it comes to one's prowess in looking after oneself, there are few under the heavens who can match me, Chen Pingan said with a smile. Pei Qian picked up her little bamboo chair and scooted a little closer to her master, and the two of them gazed into the distance together. Chen Pingan was at the Vajrabadi tier, while Pei Qian was about to become the strongest 4th-tier martial artist under the heavens. Their sitting posture and expressions were spitting images of each other. Cui Dongshan soon came to join them, and the 3 of them sat down at the table together. Cui Dongshan dug up the flagon of immortal wine that had been buried behind the bamboo building, while Chen Pingan also picked up one of the flagons of wine on the table before him, and the 2 of them downed both flagons of wine in one go. Chen Pingan wiped his lips with the back of his hand, then asked, When are you leaving? I've never actually left, Cui Dongshan replied with a smile. Wherever you are, my thoughts follow. Even in the darkness of the night, his smile was as bright and vibrant as ever. Don't try to talk like him in the future, Chen Pingan warned as he turned to Pei Qian. I never have, master, Pei Qian said with a perplexed expression. Cui Dongshan gave her a thumbs up, and she crossed her arms in a stern manner, trying to come across as an authoritative senior sister. Make sure to keep an eye on Chen Rushu, Chen Pingan said. She's not in any immediate danger, but it's always better to be safe than sorry, and keeping a constant eye on her is going to require immense patience and willpower. There was some distance between Downtrodden Mountain and the Dragon Spring prefectural city. Even though Chen Rushu had a sword talisman from the Dragon Spring sword sect, allowing her to fly without restriction, she always liked to meticulously compare different shops when making purchases, and there were also certain things that couldn't be immediately purchased as soon as she reached the prefectural city. For some items, the wait could be up to a day or 2, so she used her own money to purchase a house in the prefectural city. The prefectural overseer's office had played the role of the middleman in the sale, so she had gotten a very good price for a house in a prime location. All of her neighbors were affluent clans from the capital of the Great Li Empire, and the middleman at the time had been a fairly unknown secretary of Wu Yuan's. However, he had since taken over from Wu Yuan as prefectural overseer, and as it turned out, he was also from one of the prominent clans of the capital. On this particular day, Chen Rushu had chosen to stay at her house in the prefectural city, and she would only return to Downtrodden Mountain once she had completed all of her purchases the next day. Generally speaking, she would leave behind her keys to Zhoumili or Tsingyuanji each time before she left Downtrodden Mountain. You can count on me, teacher, Cui Dongshan assured. If nothing else, the spies of the Great Li Empire all possess patience and willpower in spades. Wei Bo has also requested the northernmost mountain god to keep an eye on the prefectural city in private. Besides, Nuanshu is currently wearing a Dao robe with an illusion cast onto it, and it was once in my possession. Even if something happens suddenly, and the spies of the Great Li Empire and the mountain god aren't able to intervene in time, that Dao robe alone will be enough to save her from 1 or 2 attacks from a nascent tier swordsman. By then, Wei Bo will have been made aware of the situation, and it'll be a monumental achievement for the perpetrator to even kill themselves on Wei Bo's watch. Is this a form of corruption? Chen Pingan asked with a smile. In order to ensure the safety of certain people on Downtrodden Mountain, sacrifices had to be made by others. If Chen Rushu wanted to be able to frequently leave Downtrodden Mountain and remain safe, then Chen Pingan, Cui Dongshan, and Wei Bo would have to plan meticulously to ensure that she remained out of harm's way. Having said that, it was all well worth it. Regardless of how much peril Chen Pingan and Cui Dongshan found themselves in during their travels, they could always take solace in the thought of Downtrodden Mountain, and they had Chen Rushu to thank for that. There was a time when Chen Pingan had been quite conflicted about his own calculating nature. He felt like he was a conniving and pedantic accountant who was constantly calculating everything to maximize self-interest, even the minute changes in the hearts of others. However, looking back now, he realized that he had simply been holding himself to unnecessarily high standards. These calculations on things beyond money were very important and valuable. There was no need to hide them, and there was certainly no need to feel any internal conflict over the matter. Ultimately, his goal was to prevent any and all preventable tragedies that resulted from too little thought and consideration on his part. Once such a tragedy took place, there was no way for him to make amends. He could tear the perpetrators to shreds, but what purpose would that serve? Would it assuage his remorse or reverse time to before the tragedy took place? Right now, Downtrodden Mountain was his responsibility, and the same applied to the Lotus Root blessed land going forward. He had to ensure a clear conscience first before thinking about earning money. Money had to be earned in order to support cultivation, but the pursuit of monetary gain could not come at the cost of moral compromises. Even if we discount you, Senior Sister Pei, Zhu Lian, Lu Baixiang, and Wei Xian, the amount of additional martial fortune that our Downtrodden Mountain provides to the Great Li Empire alone would make me fully justified in requesting a nascent tier guest elder to be constantly stationed in the Dragon Spring Prefectural City, Cui Dongshan said. Even the old bastard wouldn't raise any objections. How could you possibly expect people to make contributions for you without providing them with ample compensation? I constantly have to deal with so much crap in the south, helping that old bastard keep everything under control. Even blood brothers have to do things the right way whenever finances are concerned. I'm already doing the old bastard a huge favor by not asking him for a salary. Chen Pingan offered no response. He didn't see it fit to comment on Cui Dongshan and Cui Qian's internal affairs. Only now did Pei Qian come to realize just how complicated the circumstances surrounding Chen Rushu were, and she immediately became a little concerned. Should I accompany Nuanshu from now on when she goes on her shopping trips? Accompany her and do what? Cui Dongshan scoffed in amusement. You're just a fourth-tier martial artist. You'd be offering up your head on a silver platter. Pei Qian groaned in frustration as her head dropped down onto the table with a loud thump, and she sighed. What can I do? My progress is just too slow. Grandpa Cui said that my progression is like a crawling tortoise. It frustrated him to no end. A peculiar look appeared on Chen Pingan's face. You're already getting frustrated? Cui Dongshan asked with a chuckle. Your progress is only going to slow down even further once you reach the 5th and 6th tiers. In particular, the breakthrough to the martial courage tier is not something that can be hurried. Do you have to be so annoying? Pei Qian snapped in frustration as she raised her head from the table. Can't you give me some words of encouragement? Can words of encouragement feed you or something? Cui Dongshan countered. Yes. It feeds my morale. Pei Qian argued in a justified manner. Whenever I'm eating with Mealy, I can always eat an extra bowl of rice, but when I see you, I don't even have an appetite anymore. There's no use in trying to rush things, so just be content with what you have and make slow and steady progress. Chen Pingan consoled. Wise words as ever, master. Pei Qian praised loudly. You see, teacher? I told you the rampant flattery on Downtrodden Mountain has nothing to do with me. Cui Dongshan declared. Chen Pingan ignored him as he changed the subject and said, I've already spoken with the former emperor of the Southern Garden Nation, Wei Liang. However, the new emperor Wei Yan is a man who harbors very lofty ambitions, so you may have to have a word with Wei Xian. Wei Xian was the founding emperor of the Southern Garden Nation, and also the first ruler in the history of the Lotus Flower Blessed Land to roam the Blessed Land in search of immortals. Wei Xian is extremely fortunate to have been brought out of the Lotus Flower Blessed Land by you, teacher, Cui Dongshan said with a smile. He is forever indebted to you for that. and he has no grounds to turn down any instruction that you have for him. As long as the rules are followed, everyone on Downtrodden Mountain is to be granted full freedom and autonomy, Chen Pingan said with a shake of his head. This is not a place for me to impose my will and lord over everyone as some almighty sage. If I were to do that, everyone would eventually leave. Today it'll be Lu Baixiang, tomorrow it'll be Wei Xian, and the day after tomorrow Mr. Zhong will also be gone. Wise words as ever, teacher, Cui Dongshan praised. Hey, don't copy me, Pei Qian yelled with a furious expression. Cui Dongshan shook his head from side to side while flapping his sleeves up and down as he provoked. What are you gonna do about it? Come hit me. If I dodge even once, I'll take after the old bastard's surname. Pei Qian clutched her hands to her head, feeling the onset of a headache. She would have already lashed out by now if her master weren't here. To her surprise, her master smiled as he asked, He's asking you to hit him, so why not grant him his wish? It can never hurt to be a people-pleaser. Pei Qian's eyes instantly lit up with excitement. Cui Dongshan raised a hand as he joined his index and middle fingers and warned, I have immortal techniques up my sleeve, senior sister. If someone with a full stomach falls prey to my immobilizing spell, TSK, that truly would be a horrific fate. On second thoughts, I think we should uphold peace and harmony above all else, master, Pei Qian said in a serious manner. That's also reasonable, Chen Pingan replied with a smile and a nod. Go to bed early today. I'll spar with you tomorrow. Ha! Pei Qian's eyes instantly widened in shock. She wasn't afraid of enduring hardship. Instead, she was worried that she would make a fool of herself in front of her master once the limits of her pitiful fourth-tier cultivation base were revealed. Just because you shouldn't rush things doesn't mean you shouldn't continue to work hard, Chen Pingan said with a smile. Once you reach your fifth-tier bottleneck, you can leave the mountain to travel on your own. When the time comes, it'll be up to you to decide whether you want to bring Li Huai with you. Of course, you'll be receiving the little donkey that I promised you as well. It's already after midnight, so it's technically already the next day. You can begin teaching me fist techniques right now, Pei Qian urged in an eager manner. Chen Pingan pressed down onto her head, then gave it a gentle shove as he said, I have some serious matters to discuss with Cui Dongshan. I can understand discussing serious matters with Mr. Zhong, but what could you possibly have to discuss with the big white goose? Pei Qian protested in a pitiable manner. I'm not sleepy, master. You two can talk, and I'll just listen. You're already openly defying your master as a mere fourth-tier martial artist. You're going to be ordering your master around by the time you reach the fifth and sixth tiers. Cui Dongshan scoffed. Pei Qian refused to budge, crossing her arms as she sneered. How deplorable of you to be trying to drive a wedge between master and me. She's not going to listen to me, teacher, Cui Dongshan said in a resigned manner. Chen Pingan bent his middle finger and thumb, threatening a flick to the forehead, and only then did Pei Qian depart in a huff. A moment later, Chen Pingan didn't even turn his head as he asked, Did you find some money in the tall grass over there? Pei Qian had been hiding behind a thicket of tall grass, and she stood up with a sheepish expression as she explained, I heard a grasshopper chirping as I was passing by, so I tried to catch it, but it got away. All right, I'm really going to bed now. After Pei Qian was far away, a hint of concern appeared on Chen Pingan's face as he mused. I know that some concerns are unnecessary, and that there's no point in thinking about certain things, but it's always easier to advise others on such matters than take one's own advice. Pei Qian's breakthroughs have been coming a little too quickly, and after taking in so much martial fortune, she's only going to draw more attention to herself, Cui Dongshan said. Thankfully, Weibo is hiding her from prying eyes, and the Jewel Small World is renowned for strange people and events, so she's not going to arouse any suspicion anytime soon. However, there might be some trouble once she goes out to travel the world on her own. Even so, I'm a little happy about how she was able to think of the principle of pulling punches on her own during this trip to the Lotus Root Blessed Land, Chen Pingan said with a sigh. I'm just worried that she'll take it too far and try to take after me too much. If that happens, then her world might become much duller and less exciting than it otherwise would have been. What's wrong with taking good qualities from others before learning to be oneself? Cui Dongshan argued. Isn't that what you've been doing for all these years, teacher? Would it be a good thing if all of the children under the heavens focused solely on self-expression without learning any rules? The formative years of a child's development are the most important time for them to learn rules and discipline. Yet seniors insist on mollycoddling their children during those important years, unwilling to be stern and harsh when necessary. I think that's a very bad thing. Chen Pingan nodded in response. You're also worried for Chao Qinglong's future, aren't you? Cui Dongshan asked. Of course. I don't want to tell Chao Qinglang how to live his life, but at the same time, I don't want him to squander his life and fall behind in his cultivation and studies. Why don't you get Zhong Qiu to bring Chao Qinglang with him when he decides to leave the lotus root-blessed land? Cui Dongshan suggested with a smile. That way, Chao Qinglang can explore this new world with Zhong Qiu by his side. He can start his journey from the eastern treasured Vile continent and decide his future path from there. Chao Qinglang is a boy who possesses great aptitude. Zhong Qiu has taught him the importance of developing a rich and well-rounded foundation, while that friend of yours by the name of Lu Tai taught him to stay far away from rigidity and pedantry. The two of them have worked together splendidly in conjunction with each other. Zhong Qiu is a just and righteous man with a very pure and focused base of knowledge, while Lu Tai's base of knowledge is broader, but not chaotic. Furthermore, he harbors an earnest respect for Zhong Qiu. And that's why they were able to work together so seamlessly to develop and nurture Chao Qinglang together. Otherwise, if they opposed each other and used Chao Qinglang as a figurative rope in a tug-of-war, then he would eventually be torn into two. Ultimately, it's still all thanks to you, teacher. Would it be selfish of me to say that I really want to see Chao Qinglong's name on the ancestral hall genealogical records of our downtrodden mountain? Chen Pingan asked. Did you ever bring up this topic to Chao Qinglang when you met with him? Cui Dongshan asked with a smile. Of course, I asked him for his thoughts and input on the matter, Chen Pingan replied in a resigned manner. After I brought it up, he began grinning and nodding like an eager child. It almost felt like how Pei Qian always looks when she's trying to appease me. And instead of helping me make up my mind, it's only made me feel more hesitant. Cui Dongshan chuckled. What's the problem then? You want to welcome him into our downtrodden mountain's embrace. And he clearly wants the same thing. If you're feeling guilty about it, then why not think about how much effort and energy it's going to take for you to nurture him in the future? Doesn't that make you feel better? Chen Pingan considered this notion, and it did indeed put his mind at ease. He then thought of another child, namely Zhao Shuxia, and wondered how the boy's fist technique practice was coming along. Zhao Shuxia was also someone that Chen Pingan held in high regard, but he had different hopes and expectations for each child. Zhao Shuxia's approach to fist techniques was one that most closely resembled his own. It was an approach that relied solely on diligent effort and nothing else. Chen Pingan was very fond of Zhao Shuxia for his purity of mind and his sincerity and resolve when it came to pursuing martial arts. Thus, Chen Pingan mentioned Zhao Shuxia to Cui Dongshan for the first time. Of course, he also brought up Zhao Yuan, the girl who was a fine cultivation prospect, as well as Wu Shuowen, the fisherman for whom he had a great deal of respect. Chen Pingan felt much more at ease about Zhao Shuxia now that he knew that Cui Dongshan would be checking in on him every once in a while. He was confident that Cui Dongshan wouldn't do anything unnecessary, unless it would have a positive impact in one's time of need. An example was the modifications that he had suggested to enhance the power of the Flax Robe Sect's mountain protection formation by 20%. Of course, he had held back somewhat and hadn't suggested all of the modifications that he could have. Zhu Quan was well aware of this, but even though there was so much at stake, she hadn't tried to coax more out of Cui Dongshan through her connection to Chen Pingan. In fact, she hadn't even made any implicit remarks on the subject, and she certainly hadn't nagged Chen Pingan at all. She knew that the Flax Robe Sect wouldn't be able to offer equal compensation for such a massive favor, so she didn't try to ask for the favor to begin with. If it were Chen Pingan instead, then Zhu Quan would have definitely been much more open and straightforward. Even if she couldn't offer up ample compensation even after requesting funds from the Flax Robe Sect's upper sect, then she would just have to owe a debt to Chen Pingan, and she wouldn't have felt guilty in the slightest. However, Chen Pingan was Chen Pingan, while Cui Dongshan was Cui Dongshan, even if they were teacher and student, and both of them called Downtrodden Mountain their home. There were certain lines that simply couldn't be crossed. In the Flax Robe Sect, Zhu Quan didn't seem like a very fit or worthy sect leader. Her cultivation base was decent, but it wasn't quite enough to lead her sect, so she could only choose the least favorable option, personally stationing herself in Green Cottage Town to oppose Skeleton Wall City. However, the entire continent was aware that the Flax Robe sect was very easy to work with and had clear lines between friend and foe. This ubiquitous, positive reputation was equivalent to an immense sum of wealth for the Flax Robe sect. During Chen Pingan's journey across the northern complete reed continent, he had learned many principles that couldn't be gleaned from books from two places, namely Zhu Quan's Flax Robe sect and spiritual master Fire Dragon's ground-lying peak. Chen Pingan pulled out 2 flagons of rice wine, one each for Cui Dongshan and himself, and this time, both of them drank quite slowly. Now that Downtrodden Mountain was relatively established, there were naturally many things that they had to deal with. They had to take care in their dealings with Governor Weili, as well as the provincial city god. And this wasn't something that was made any easier by the fact that Cui Dongshan was the leader of the Great Li Empire's Green Ripple Pavilion. Meanwhile, Lu Baixiang and Lu Chongrun were already on the way back to Aobak Ridge after securing the Water Palace and the Dragon Boat. Once Lu Baixiang arrived on Downtrodden Mountain, it would be time for his 2 direct disciples, Yuan Bao and Jian Lai, to be included in the genealogical records. However, what was rather awkward was that even now, Downtrodden Mountain still didn't have an ancestral hall. This was because there were many occasions where Chen Pingan had to be present as the master of Downtrodden Mountain, and the establishment of an ancestral hall was certainly one such important occasion. Hence, he would have to stay on Downtrodden Mountain for a while, until Lu Baixiang and Zhu Lian returned from Old Dragon City. During this time, another matter that he had considered was whether Zhou Mili's official appointment as the right-hand guardian of Downtrodden Mountain would evoke displeasure and indignation from certain people. "I'm going to Dragon Riding Alley," Chen Pingan suddenly declared as he rose to his feet. "On foot?" Cui Dongshan asked with a smile. "Pei Qian has a sword talisman from the Dragon Spring Sword sect, but I don't," Chen Pingan replied. "I don't want to trouble Wei Bo in the middle of the night. And I can also pay a visit to Zheng Dafeng on the way to check on how he's recovering from his rolled ankle." "In that case, I'll come with you," Cui Dongshan said. As the 2 of them descended the mountain, they just so happened to run into Cin Yuanji, who was practicing her fist techniques as she scaled the mountain. Chen Pingan and Cui Dongshan stepped to the side to allow her through. Cin Yuanji remained silent, completely immersed in her own fist intent as she performed her walking meditation up the mountain. The 2 of them continued their descent. "That girl is as stubborn as they come," Cui Dongshan chuckled. "Somehow, she has eyes only for Zhu Lian." "That shows that Zhu Lian has a good eye for picking disciples," Chen Pingan replied with a nod. "You've transformed the entire Downtrodden Mountain into a bunch of insincere suck-ups, and Cin Yuanji is the only exception, so she must be cherished. If it makes you happy to think of me in such an unfavorable light, then I suppose I can take the blame." Cui Dongshan sighed in a resigned manner. After reaching the foot of the mountain, Chen Pingan knocked on the door, but even after a long wait, there was no response. However, he didn't intend to let Zheng Dafeng off the hook, and he began pounding the door, making a huge commotion. Only then did Zheng Dafeng limp to the door before opening it in a bleary-eyed fashion, and he feigned a look of surprise at the sight of Chen Pingan as he exclaimed, "I didn't know you were back, Mountain Master. Why didn't you tell me? Is it because you couldn't be bothered? You have no regard for a mere gatekeeper like me, is that it? In that case, why are you visiting me all of a sudden? My heart has truly been broken. Clearly, I'm just an eyesore to you, so I may as well go back to sleep and spare both of us this unwanted meeting. What if you decide to kick me out and I have to leave the mountain? What would I do then? I'd have to sleep on the streets. It's about to be winter soon. Surely you wouldn't be so cruel as to kick me out now. If you have something to say, then let's discuss it another time. I'm sure you have nothing important to discuss with a lowly gatekeeper like myself anyway, so I won't take up any more of your precious time." With that, Zheng Dafeng turned to close the door, giving one long and continuous spiel that didn't allow Chen Pingan the chance to get even a single word in. Chen Pingan pressed a hand firmly against the door, keeping it open as he smiled and said, "I heard you injured your leg. This is a very pressing concern, so of course I had to come and check on you." Zheng Dafeng put on a brave expression as he said, "It's no big deal. As a man, as long as you don't injure your third leg, anything else can be considered a minor injury." One person was trying to close the door, while the other was keeping it open, resulting in an impasse. So you're just going to start bullying me after making a breakthrough? Zhang Dafeng complained. If that's how it's going to be, then I'm going to have to resort to some shameless tactics to protect myself. I really do have to talk to you, Chen Pingan said in an exasperated manner. Who do you want to talk to me about? Zhang Dafeng asked. Not Pei Qian if that's what you're worried about, Chen Pingan snapped with a roll of his eyes. Zhang Dafeng immediately extended a bow of apology, and all of a sudden, his limp was completely gone as he wound an arm around Chen Pingan's shoulder and eagerly ushered him inside as he invited, Please come in, Mountain Master. I wish I could offer you a better welcome, but there's only so much I can do with this tiny house of mine. Look at this place. I'm not one to level accusations and badmouth others, but Julien has truly been far too stingy here. This house is so tiny it's pathetic. To think that the gatekeeper of the esteemed downtrodden mountain has such an unsightly abode. I'm too ashamed to even go buy wine in the town, and I don't even dare to tell anyone that I'm from downtrodden mountain. Julien is a good friend and very easy to get along with, but when it comes to official matters, he's far too much of a miser. Cui Dongshan grinned. How unfortunate. I am on the verge of tears from your sobering story. As you should be, Zhang Dafeng said in an earnest manner, seemingly completely oblivious to Cui Dongshan's sarcasm. I almost got into a fight with Julien and Wei Bo for your sake over the splitting of the lotus flower-blessed land. We got into a massive argument, and in order to convince those two to give you a share, I placed myself in such severe peril that I was only just barely able to avoid a beating. Unfortunately, it didn't amount to anything in the end, so all I can do is drink my days away in frustration, and that's how I ended up rolling my ankle. You have my utmost gratitude, Cui Dongshan said with a smile and a nod, then stopped in his tracks and told Chen Pingan that he would wait for him at the entrance of the mountain. After that, he stepped outside and gently closed the door behind himself. Chen Pingan and Zhang Dafeng sat down, and the former told the latter about the matter of the soul, and the mortal form that he had heard about from Li Lu. It's true, but I no longer have the mental willpower required to pursue such a thing, Zhang Dafeng confirmed with a nod. Why are you bringing this up? Are you worried that Downtrodden Mountain is lacking in capable fighters, so you want me to make an effort to recover my former cultivation base? You think I'm an embarrassment to Downtrodden Mountain, is that it? You know I would never think that, Chen Pingan said with a shake of his head. I knew you wouldn't, that's why I asked, Zhang Dafeng said with a smile. It's called making conversation where there's none to be made. If I didn't have this skill, then I would already have been relegated to live out my days alone in the old house. I came to tell you that if you want to go somewhere for a change of scenery, then you can make some frequent trips to the lotus root blessed land, Chen Pingan said. However, that's just a suggestion from me. Ultimately, it's still up to you. Zhang Dafeng seemed rather tempted by the idea, stroking his own chin as he nodded and said, Old Man Cui intentionally left half of his martial fortune in the lotus root blessed land, and it's also recently been elevated to a mid-grade blessed land, resulting in a sharp increase in spiritual energy, so it has indeed become a place worth visiting. I'll consider it. Maybe I can open a lucrative brothel over there? A wide grin appeared on Zhang Dafeng's face as he waved a hand to dismiss the idea. He couldn't do something so morally bankrupt. Instead, he could open a wine shop and hire a few elegant saleswomen. Perhaps they would be too shy to bring in much business, so he also had to hire a few voluptuous and talkative hostesses to drink with his customers. Only then would he be able to guarantee a good number of return customers. Otherwise, it would not be a very lucrative business idea, and he would only be bringing more shame to Downtrodden Mountain. It would essentially be a carbon copy of the role that he played back in that shop in Old Dragon City, where he would officially be shopkeeper, but his job would simply be to do nothing but ogle his pretty female employees all day. Chen Pingan didn't know what Zhang Dafeng was plotting, but the wide grin on his face and the sly look in his eyes were rather off-putting for Chen Pingan, so he stood up to depart. Zhang Dafeng escorted him to the door, and had he been given permission by Chen Pingan, he would have most likely been willing to accompany the latter all the way to the small town. Chen Pingan and Cui Dongshan departed together. Zhang Dafeng heaved a forlorn sigh to himself. Earlier, he had intentionally brought up the matter of Cui Cheng's martial fortune, in response to which Chen Pingan had displayed no reaction. This was a good thing but also not a good thing. There was simply no helping it. Different people were bound to be bogged down by different concerns. As for Cui Dongshan, that was someone that Zheng Dafeng didn't like to interact with much because he found the former far too calculating. Instead of returning to bed, Zheng Dafeng went out for a walk, making his way to the entrance of the mountain under the moonlight, where he leaned against a white jade pillar. There were no clear-cut factions on Downtrodden Mountain, but one would be able to see some if they were to look closely enough. There was one surrounding Cui Dongshan, and the same applied to Lu Baixiang and Wei Xian as well as Shi Rou. Cui Dongshan could easily introduce many new faces to his faction, and make it the most powerful one on Downtrodden Mountain overnight if he pleased. However, that didn't make Zheng Dafeng feel like he was an expendable member of Downtrodden Mountain. If the people around Cui Dongshan wanted to enter Downtrodden Mountain, especially if they wanted to be included in the genealogical records, then they had to at least go through the entrance first, and he just so happened to be the gatekeeper. With that in mind, Zheng Dafeng immediately realized that he was an extremely important figure, one who was truly indispensable for Downtrodden Mountain. After waiting in silence for a long while, he suddenly stomped his foot in frustration. He had seen Sun Yuanji scaling the mountain during her walking meditation earlier in the night, but why wasn't she coming down again? Shi Rou opened the doors of the shop, and a rather awkward look appeared on her face at the sight of Chen Pingan and Cui Dongshan. It would have been fine if it were only Chen Pingan, but Cui Dongshan's presence immediately had Shi Rou feeling very uneasy. They made their way into the backyard to find Chen Lingjun yawning as he stood next to the skywell. Chen Pingan instructed Shi Rou to open the door of a side room, then lit the lamp on the table before pulling out a large stack of notes, as well as maps from both the authorities and drawn by himself. From there, he began outlining the journey that Chen Lingjun would have to take along Plenty River. As he did so, he pulled out a bunch of black and white ghost stones that had the names of various people and factions engraved upon them. For example, Li Yuan of the Water Dragon sect and the Southern Fragrance River Goddess were represented by white stones, and the same applied to the likes of Tanling, Tangxi, and Song Lanqiao of the Spring Dew Garden, as well as factions like Cloudtop City, the Rainbow Sparrow Residence, and Duckweed Sword Lake. As for the relatively few black stones, those mostly represented members of the esteemed Mystery Department Yang clan. With regard to these stones, Chen Pingan explained with a smile that they may have been black and white, but human nature was not so clear-cut, so the stones could only serve as a rough guide. He told Chen Lingjun that once he embarked on his journey, he couldn't solely rely on what these black and white stones represented without thinking for himself. Otherwise, he was likely going to find himself in a lot of trouble. Looking at the white line of ghost stones on the table, Chen Lingjun grappled with an internal conflict for quite some time before finally bringing himself to blurt out a single word. "Thanks." Chen Pingan was rather taken aback and he smiled as he jibed. "You're thanking me? What's next? The sun's going to rise in the middle of the night. I already thanked you, so I've done my part. If you want to mock me for it, then suit yourself." Chen Lingjun grumbled. Chen Pingan was in a good mood, and he was planning to go into extensive detail about the route that he had marked out for Chen Lingjun, and by his estimates, it would be morning by the time he was done. "I suggest you focus and listen carefully," Cui Dongshan urged with a threatening tone in his voice. "Your master here put his life on the line to scout this route for you. No one has ever had a more meticulously considered route planned out for them prior to their river journey." An anxious look appeared on Chen Lingjuan's face as he tightened his grip around the stack of notes in his hands. "It's not that serious," Chen Pingan said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "My top priority for this trip to the northern complete reed continent was my own journey, and mapping out this route was only a secondary objective, so there's no need to be grateful to me. However, do remember at all times that this is the foundation of your great Tao, so if you don't take it seriously, then you'll be doing yourself a massive disservice. As a flood dragon, I understand that there's no point for you to cultivate on Downtrodden Mountain, so I've never tried to urge you to be more diligent in your cultivation. However, you must change your lazy ways and regard this journey as one of the utmost importance. If I find out at any point that you're treating this journey like a joke, then I'd rather send someone to capture you and bring you back to Downtrodden Mountain than allow you to wander around like a fool. I'm warning you now. If you treat this like a game, you will pay with your life. I understand the severity of the situation, Chen Lingjun assured with a nod. I trust you, Chen Pingan said with a smile. Chen Lingjun looked up at Chen Pingan, and he was very much reassured by the latter's earnest eyes and warm smile. Chen Pingan smiled as he pulled out some writing supplies, then set them down onto the table as he said, writing stuff down is always more reliable than banking solely on memory. I'll be going into a lot of detail, and I suggest you write down anything that you feel is of significance. That way, you'll have notes that you can examine during your journey. You've only stopped just short of completing the journey for him, Cui Dongshan scoffed. Chen Lingjun was just about to sit down, but he instantly froze upon hearing Cui Dongshan's disdainful remark, and he lowered his head as he held onto the notes in his hands in a white-knuckled grip. Chen Pingan took a glance at Cui Dongshan, and the latter immediately raised his hands in surrender as he said, All right, I'll go sit outside. With that, Cui Dongshan left the room and closed the door behind himself, then carried a stool over to the skywell before taking a seat. He leaned back with his hands cupped behind the back of his head, then suddenly yelled, Shuro, where are the sunflower seeds? Coming. Shuro replied in a timid manner, so panicked that she even forgot to disguise her female voice. Having stayed on Dragon Riding Alley for so long, she had almost completely forgotten about her own female form, but a demanding yell from Cui Dongshan was all it took to jog her memory. Chen Pingan patted Chen Lingjun on the shoulder as he said, Cui Dongshan has a sharp tongue and can be very harsh, that much I'll admit. However, that doesn't mean that you should ignore everything that he says. Aside from unwarranted criticisms and insults, whenever we hear something that we feel to be unpleasant, it's most likely because it resonated with us in some way and forced us to confront some type of uncomfortable reality. We can pretend to be unbothered, but deep down we have to think about such things, however uncomfortable they may be. A bitter pill can be hard to swallow, but the best medicines and remedies are often bitter and unsavory. I'm not going to bore you with any more of my principles. In any case, once we part ways, you won't be able to hear my lectures for quite some time, even if you wanted to. Where are you going this time? Chen Lingjun asked. To Stalactite Mountain and the Sword Chi Great Wall, Chen Pingan replied with a smile. Aren't you being a far too irresponsible mountain master? Chen Lingjun complained. There's so much stuff to be done on the mountain, yet you're constantly away. He wanted to ask Chen Pingan why he hadn't returned to Downtrodden Mountain earlier, but he ultimately held his tongue because he knew that he was the least worthy one to raise such a question. I accept the criticism, but I'm not going to change my ways for now, Chen Pingan said with a nod, and Chen Lingjun flashed an amused grin. From there, Chen Lingjun held his brush aloft as he began listening carefully to Chen Pingan's breakdown. After writing down a certain detail, Chen Lingjun suddenly raised his head and asked, Master, are you still going to be like this in the future? What do you mean? Chen Pingan asked with a puzzled expression. Surely there will come a day when there are many people on Downtrodden Mountain. Are you going to treat everyone like this? Chen Lingjun asked. Chen Pingan considered the question for a moment, then shook his head as he smiled and replied, It'll be very difficult. I'm inevitably going to be more attached to some people than others, and there will also be more things that I'll have to consider. It's not necessarily the case that doing everything myself will always lead to the best outcomes. The more people there are on Downtrodden Mountain, the more complex things are going to become, and it'll become impossible for me to attend to everything and everyone myself. I can only do my best to try to ensure that there's a positive atmosphere and culture on the mountain. For example, just because Cui Dongshan possesses the greatest cultivation base and powers of everyone doesn't mean that he's always right, and that everyone should always listen to him. If you think he's wrong but are too afraid to confront him, then you can come to me to tell your version of events, and I'll be sure to listen carefully. Chen Lingjun nodded in response while Cui Dongshan complained from outside. What do you mean, teacher? I would never use my power to force my will upon others. Chen Lingjun rolled his eyes, and Chen Pingan continued explaining the details. Sure enough, it was bright and early the next morning by the time Chen Pingan was finished, and by then, Chen Lingjun had written down several dozen important points in less than stellar handwriting. I have to say, your handwriting is far worse than Pei Qian's, Chen Pingan remarked. Chen Lingjun became flushed with embarrassment as he protested. It's not like I make transcriptions every day like her. If I've been making daily transcriptions like her, then a piece of calligraphy from me would be able to fetch at least a few lesser heat coins. Or maybe snowflake coins. Do you believe that yourself? Chen Pingan asked with an amused smile. Chen Lingjun immediately fell into a deflated silence. Chen Pingan tucked his hands up their opposite sleeves as he sat in his chair and closed his eyes, pondering meticulously to see if he had missed anything. He couldn't think of anything for the moment, and if he thought of something at a later date, then he would just have to write a letter to Chen Lingjun. After reopening his eyes, Chen Pingan asked, "How is the Imperial River God doing nowadays?" "He's doing all right," Chen Lingjun replied in an ambiguous fashion. "You can go pay him a visit and bid him farewell before you travel to the northern complete reed continent," Chen Pingan encouraged. "Have a parting meal with him, but don't tell him that you're going to embark on your river journey. Instead, just tell him that you're going on a long journey. Treating others with sincerity doesn't entail being an open book and revealing everything to them. Instead, what you should focus on is not causing trouble for them, and if possible, resolve some troubles for them, but not because you expect any form of gratitude or reciprocation from them." Chen Lingjun stowed away his writing supplies, then rested his chin on the table as he sighed in a dejected manner. "I didn't have to think about any of that in the past. All we did was feast and make merry to our heart's content. The world won't allow us to constantly coast along and not think about anything," Chen Pingan said with a smile. "It can't hurt to think more and be more thoughtful." A hesitant look appeared on Chen Lingjun's face, and he didn't even dare to look at Chen Pingan as he said in a timid manner, "What if I told you that I don't actually want to go on my river journey? In fact, I don't even want to go to the northern complete reed continent at all. Instead, I just want to stay on Downtrodden Mountain and live out the rest of my life here. Would you be angry if I said that?" Chen Pingan remained silent as a smile appeared on his face, and it seemed that he had already anticipated this. Chen Lingjun also fell silent, and he still didn't dare to look at Chen Pingan. "I won't be angry," Chen Pingan replied. "Really?" Chen Lingjun exclaimed with a bewildered expression as he instantly sat bolt upright. "I never felt like you had to go on your river journey right away just because there's a massive payoff at the end," Chen Pingan said with a smile. "In fact, I'm of the opinion that if you don't have a strong desire in your own heart to embark on this journey, then there's no hurry for you to do so at all. It's not like Plenty River is going anywhere. Someday, when you truly understand yourself and sincerely wish to go on this journey, your chances of success will be much higher than if you go right now with no clear direction and merely treat it like some type of obligatory chore. Having said that, this is a journey that you'll inevitably have to make at some point, so it can't hurt to make some preparations in advance. This might sound a little harsh to you, but I feel obligated to tell you my true thoughts. Just as Cui Dongshan said, there are many flood dragons in the world, but not all of them have the opportunity to go on a river journey on a major river. Hence, I would be very angry with you if you clearly knew that this journey can't be delayed, but simply don't want to go because you've grown accustomed to a lazy lifestyle and don't want to have to endure any hardships. However, if you are instead of the opinion that this is a largely inconsequential matter, and that you can pursue your own great Tao even without embarking on a river journey, then that's an entirely different story. Alternatively, perhaps you simply like to stay on Downtrodden Mountain, and are content to spend the rest of your life here. In either of those cases, I wouldn't be angry at all, whether it be as your master or as the master of Downtrodden Mountain. "I see," Chen Lingjun said with a smile. "I'm very pleased that you always follow Chan Rushu in secret to protect her whenever she goes on her shopping trips to the prefectural city. That shows that you have a sense of responsibility," Chen Pingan said with a smile. "I'm not protecting her. I'm just going out for strolls," Chen Lingjun denied in an embarrassed fashion. "Who told you that? I'll slap the crap out." "It was me," Cui Dongshan interjected lazily from outside. Chen Lingjun instantly stiffened, then rushed over to open the door before carefully approaching Cui Dongshan to massage his shoulders. "You must be sore and tired from sitting the entire night, Brother Cui. How can I alleviate your discomfort? Just give the word, and your wish is my command. Don't be shy. We're all one big, loving family, so feel free to order me around a bit. How's the massage? Is it to your liking?" Chen Pingan stepped out of the side room, then kicked Chen Lingjun in the backside as he scoffed in amusement. "Our Downtrodden Mountain doesn't need any more insincere suck-ups." The neighboring Berklover shop on Dragon Riding Alley was also open, and inside was the girl with the nickname of Jior. Chen Pingan greeted her with a smile, then asked, "Where are your master and senior brother, Jior?" Jior hurriedly extended a curtsy with a look of surprise and elation as she returned Chen Pingan's greeting, then replied in a slightly embarrassed manner, "Master has been looking after the business all this time, and he's getting up there in age, so he'll only be waking up a little later. I've been tasked with opening the shop today, but it wasn't like this in the past. As for my senior brother, he's been out gathering medicinal herbs for quite a few days now, so he should be back soon." Jior prepared to depart to wake her master. After all, this was a personal visit from the mountain master, so even if she were scolded or reprimanded by her master, she felt obligated to notify him. However, she was stopped by Chen Pingan, who smiled and said, "There's no need to disturb your master's rest. I was just passing by, so I decided to pay you all a visit." "Business hasn't been great for the shop, Mountain Master Chen," Jior admitted in an anxious manner. "It's fine," Chen Pingan reassured. "Business is actually not bad at all in the Berklover shop, so keep it up. If you need anything, feel free to come to Downtrodden Mountain. Don't be shy or embarrassed, and make sure to pass this message on to your master as well. He's a very considerate man, and he likes to keep all his troubles to himself, which is not a good thing because it only creates distance between us. I have some other matters to attend to, so I won't keep you any longer." Jior wrung her hands nervously behind her back as she asked in a shy voice, "You're really not going to come in for some tea, Mountain Master Chen?" "I'll pass," Chen Pingan replied with a smile and a wave of his hand. "You can save the tea for my next visit." Jior smiled in response and Chen Pingan nodded as he remarked, "Your complexion is looking much better than before, Jior. Looks like my hometown is quite a nurturing place. I was worried that you would struggle to acclimate to the conditions, but it seems that my concerns were unnecessary." Jior blushed slightly, and Chen Pingan waved her farewell. From there, he and Cui Dongshan made their way along the steps of Dragon Riding Alley to visit the ancestral residence on Clay Vase Alley. They inevitably passed by the Gu clan's ancestral residence on the way there, and Chen Pingan stopped in his tracks as he asked, "How is Uncle Gu doing?" "The family situation is still rather complicated, but right now, Gu Tao has already become a mountain god of one of the Great Li Empire's old mountains, so I'd say he's doing quite well for himself," Cui Dongshan replied. "His wife is in a position of power in the prefectural city, able to get pretty much whatever she asks for, and Gukin is also doing pretty well in Bamboo Scroll Lake. With both her son and her husband doing so well, she's able to lead a much more content life, and many of her flaws are naturally concealed as a result." "What about the house with the beautiful water noble wind plaque?" Chen Pingan asked as he continued onward. "You're asking about the ghost bride? She's a pitiable ghost who fell in love with a pitiable man," Cui Dongshan said with a sigh. "She ended up as a deplorable and hated entity, while the latter is the one that we should truly feel pity for. He was screwed over badly by the academy scholars of both the Lu Empire and the Great Sui Nation, ultimately choosing to end his own life by jumping into a lake. He was just a naive scholar who wanted to earn himself a virtuous scholar title through the weight of his merits, hoping that he would receive the acknowledgement of the imperial court, thereby allowing him to marry a female ghost in a proper and recognized marriage. Unfortunately, he was born too early in the Great Li Empire of old, rather than the Great Li Empire of the present day. Otherwise, his story would have had a completely different outcome. As a ghostly entity, the female ghost couldn't even enter the academy, but she insisted on barging her way in and almost met her demise as a result. Ultimately, she wasn't a complete fool, and she used up the last of her goodwill with the Great Li Empire's imperial court to take the remains of the scholar with her. On top of that, she also learned about the long-concealed truth. As it turned out, the scholar never betrayed her love, and it was his love for her that ultimately led to his death. After finding out the truth, she went completely insane. After Gu Tao left her residence, she took off her bridal gown in exchange for mourning clothes, and she stumbled back to her residence with a coffin, spending every day in a heartbroken daze, telling anyone that would listen that she was waiting for someone. "Who's wrong and who's right in all of this?" Chen Pingan asked. Cui Dongshan raised a hand, then made several downward chopping motions in the air as he smiled and replied, "That depends on where you mark the beginning and the end of this story. If we start from when the female ghost and the scholar first met and fell in love, and then conclude with all of the scholars that the female ghost killed, then it becomes a very simple judgment call. The female ghost should be killed, and she doesn't even want to live on anyway, so you'd be doing her a favor by putting her out of her misery. However, if we go back further and consider all of her past good deeds and the fact that she has a good and kind nature, then it becomes very complicated. If you then also consider things from the perspective of all of the scholars who suffered unjust deaths, then it becomes almost impossible to judge the situation. Which section of the story do you want to isolate, teacher? Chen Pingan didn't offer a response. As Chen Pingan pulled out his keys to open the yard gate of the ancestral residence, Cui Dongshan smiled and asked, "Have you considered another question, teacher? Certain events are incredibly complicated. But what do they have to do with you?" Chen Pingan opened the gate, then smiled as he replied, "I'll just have to think about it a bit more." After entering the house, Chen Pingan pulled out 2 little stools. Cui Dongshan sat down, then smiled as he said, "There's a very ambiguous saying in the cultivation world that goes, all those who embark on the path of cultivation do so because they are made for it." "I've heard that before," Chen Pingan replied. The average person who hears this saying immediately feels a sense of indignation, and that the world has been far too harsh and unfair to them, Cui Dongshan said. Those who think this way are already not cut out for cultivation. Instead of anger and indignation at the world, what they should be feeling is a sense of pity for themselves. Chen Pingan was silent as he drew a circle onto the dirt ground of the courtyard with the tip of his foot, one that had a tiny opening. He then drew a larger circle outside of that incomplete circle as he said, "There must be paths that can be followed in order for everyone to have the power of choice." Cui Dongshan was silent for a moment, then said, "Aside from the first time, you haven't actually experienced true despair." Chen Pingan tucked his hands up their opposite sleeves as he leaned down slightly and directed his gaze out at Clay Vase Alley through the open yard gate. For example, if Lu Xianying had died all those years ago, Cui Dongshan continued, or if Qi Jingchun actually turned out to be the one pulling the strings behind everything and the one plotting against you the most. Or alternatively, if Guqin made you think that he had learned the errors of his ways and was taking measures to remedy his past mistakes, only for you to discover at a later date that it had all been a complete lie. Another possible scenario would be if Pei Qian had killed Chao Qinglang on her first trip to the Lotus Root Blessed Land, then chose to await the consequences, gambling on the hope that you wouldn't kill her. Chen Pingan finally broke his silence as he instructed, "Set up a small world. There are some things that I have to get off my chest." Cui Dongshan duly obliged, conjuring up a golden lightning pond using a flying sword. Chen Pingan rose to his feet with his hands tucked up their opposite sleeves, then began walking in circles in the yard as he said, "Mr. Qi has continued to protect me even after his death because there is a battle of the 3 teachings that Mr. Qi intentionally connected to me. I am aware of this." Cui Dongshan stood up, his complexion paling slightly as he exclaimed, "You shouldn't have found out the truth so soon, teacher." Chen Pingan turned to Cui Dongshan in an expressionless manner as he said, "Rest assured, I'm very smart and also very composed, so Mr. Qi isn't going to lose, and nor will I."